Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast, episode 162. I'm going to make a phone call, and we have a surprise guest. Dialing 1. Dialing 2.
Hello.
Hello, Dave Anderson.
Yeah,
Dave
how you doing?
Thanks for being a guest again on the podcast, episode 162. 1 mile per hour shy of Sam Groth's serve.
Yeah, that was a big one. That was a big one. He actually hit some of those on court 14 against Shane Vincent. It sounds like a firecracker.
Shane Vincent, for our listeners, first of all, Shane Groth, the Aussie. Look him up on YouTube, and you will see there are a lot of positive points about his serve that he hit 163. Shane went to Texas A&M. I one time had him visit. You sent him out from Dallas, and I had him talking to a group of juniors at that time. I mean, wasn't he ranked 1 in the U.S.? He was ranked really high.
Yeah, he was high. He won the Easter Bowl, and very good player, great kid, great work ethic, great family.
So I said to him, I'm not shocked that often, but I said, all right, Shane, tell us who's the best player you've ever practiced with. He said, Roger Federer. That kind of threw me for a loop. With
warmed Fed up the year he had a horrible Wimbledon, and Shane warmed him up at that tournament.
I know people would like us to talk about stroke production. In the beginning of the podcast, we zeroed in on forehands and backhands, nuts and bolts. Let's just talk a few minutes about doubles. What comes to your mind when I mentioned doubles? Doubles, troubles.
Well, it was nice to see Davis Cup on, and the U.S. tough one with Finland, but just the players that are playing conventional doubles like Rahm and Krajicek, and still very, very capable of going forward off their serves and looking to control the point that way. It certainly isn't the norm. It's at the point with, all of the kids, obviously, that come out of, our program or the system that we're trying to implement. I kind of prepare them because a lot of the universities, even some of the top ones they're going to, many major Power Fives, they said you're gonna likely be steered another direction and told not to come in, and but it's just become I'm always shocked at how quickly people have lost the skill and how it's become so low on the priority list. And
the skill of coming to the net.
Yeah, just how quickly that's deteriorated. The concept of serving and going forward in doubles, it's mind-boggling to me how it seems like it's just happened kind of overnight. And I know it hasn't.
Skills, if you don't use them, you lose them.
Yeah.
And one outcry that we've had is a plea is if everybody in the grassroots level of teaching in junior tennis were to commit to the Monday through Friday part of their junior development program, they would play one bounce doubles. We like to play it initially where there's no poaching. So the server comes in, return has to go cross court, and then you play it out. You can do many different variations of it. But Krajicek and Rahm, for the listeners, Austin Krajicek, Rajiv Rahm, 39 years old. Great how he's playing. I know he got a little emotional when he, I think, just reaching the final, but he actually won with Joe Salisbury. But no, it's I think that last match that they lost, Tiafoe and Tommy Paul were 0 for 4. They had a tough go with Davis Cup. They're young guys coming up and playing for their country. They were both the highest ranked players in the D division. It was, I shouldn't say division, section. It was 4 groups. A, B, C, D had nothing to do with levels. Just the 16 teams, narrowing it down to 8. But the match that Krajicek and Rahm lost was a rubber. It was over. That's
Yeah.
always pretty tough assignment to play at. In fact, Bob Bryan, who's now coaching, his brother's the assistant. He's a captain of the Davis Cup team. No one would want to play the rubber. The years ago it was 5 matches, not it's a different format now.
Yeah.
And when it was over, they would still, because the ticket holders had paid a price, and Bob Bryan would he'd want to play the singles.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, he won the triple. He won the singles, the doubles, and the team event when he was at Stanford. And with his being left-handed, his serve, I think it was admirable that he sacrifices the possibility of having a successful pro career, and they just focused on doubles. The two boys, Bryan brothers.
Yeah, I mean, I hear with doubles, it seems like people that showed some promise and maybe could make it out there on the tour at some level anyways. They would often talk about being the talk about a double specialist would come about somewhere in the late 20s, and now it seems that it seems like kids that are seniors in high school are talking about being double specialists in college and satisfied with that, and but I think that's kind of a cop out. I think that in another way is kind of a cop out in regard to building their game to its fullest capacity. But it just I think that doubles. I know there's all the changes trying to take place with prize money and making things more equitable across the board for the touring pros, which is great. But I think doubles needs some major CPR from the pro games, pro game all the way through college and then into junior tennis. And like we talk about so often, and I read your camp that's coming up potentially this year with Back to the Future with a kind of a Vic Braden tribute theme, and but that's, I think, where doubles has to go. Just the current system. I mean, when I see what these kids play on an annual basis regarding their doubles, it's not going to allow the reps, the exposure, the experience. I tell all our kids to jump in as many adult tournaments as they can to try to at least, I mean, they could play doubles and mix and get full matches in of doubles, actual, sets, 2 out of 3 sets, and try to gain some experience that way because they're not getting it.
Yeah, Vic Braden, Wintergreen, we've talked about with Mike McLaughlin, Jim Klein, and others, Andy Fitzell. I think that's a very good name that you brought that up many times in podcasts before, with a theme for tennis is Back to the Future. And I think that applies to Vic Braden, just having an event, Back to the Future, because the title of his book, 1977 Tennis for the Future. And then also his work is timeless because it's based on science. On doubles, Robbie Seguso, you and I spent a lot of time with Robbie, and he was number one in the world for 5 years. I think history, he played in the team event that was in Dusseldorf for a long time, and Jimmy Connors was playing, and Connors was on the sidelines. He was playing singles, and Robbie was playing Ken Flack, and Robbie was so popular with the pros, and so Connors starts talking to him a little bit about the doubles, and Seguso goes, "You don't even play doubles." And Connors just started laughing, but people don't realize that Connors, I mean, he won the U.S. Open, he won Wimbledon, but that the reason for Jimmy, being one of the first, is so much money came into it.
Yeah. No, Seguso was, he was pretty competent in singles as well.
Yeah, he was 21 in the world.
Yeah.
You and I go way back with so many different things. Angela Buxton won Wimbledon. She came in, you were there 6 weeks. She came in and she was writing for London Telegraph. I have a copy of it. Certainly it's not digital, but so many years ago. And I remember, she was, scratch and point, come over the ball, down on the volleys, just all myth after myth. And, I certainly talked to her many times over the years. she wrote I think 2 books. One was on our doubles partner, Theo Gibson. But I remember her asking for a meeting with Robbie. So I'm not sure if you were in on the meeting, but I was there, and she said, Robbie or Robert, no one was calling him Robbie at that time, I have one thing in common with you. I won Wimbledon doubles. And she said, I can tell you 10 years from now, people will not even remember who you are. And what her advice was for him to really zero in on learning the nuts and bolts, what we were doing with not only the group she had from England, but the people all together. Turn the clock ahead. I was at Bollettieri's with Robbie. This is, we're going back to the early 90s when we were with Angela Buxton. And Robbie Seguzo's going, Tommy Haas, that guy doesn't, because Tommy Haas was like a permanent fixture at Bollettieri's. Mm-hmm. He goes, I don't even know who that guy is. Or excuse me, that guy doesn't even know who I am. Doesn't even know who I am. And of course, Robbie gets it going, and you would think, I think I could still play with that guy. Still could play with that guy. He's put a few pounds on now, but that was we're going back decades. That was like a decade later, like Angela Buxton had said. But Robbie Seguzo as a kid, Alex Fisher at the public park in Boca Raton, the teaching pro, Memorial Park, is everybody loved to play doubles. But that was back in the day when kids weren't programmed out. They would just take private lessons. They hit the backboard. They play mini tennis for Mountain Dews, your favorite drink. Are you off?
My ex, I'm off it.
Did you quit yesterday?
Yeah. No, it's been, now if I'm being honest, I have to start over with my chips, because I had like a 13-month chip for Mountain Dew, and then somebody brought me some, not knowing that I quit. And so I dipped into the Mountain Dew a little bit about a month ago, but it didn't even taste good. It's amazing.
That's a good thing. And the sunflower seeds?
No, got off those too. You get old, you have to monitor the too much salt, blood pressure, trying to stay healthy.
For our listeners, one time I was in Dallas, and Anderson and I stopped. We pulled into this place, and the Anderson said, well, what am I going to have? And so the guy behind the counter goes, Dave, you want the usual? And it was a couple Mountain Dews, and I think a big chocolate, something. What do they call those? Chocolate what?
Eau Claire's.
There you go. But yeah, with Robbie, the doubles, I go way back with his tennis when he had a Western grip on the forehand and doing the backhand. The left hand was underneath. He was just a winner. He was just one of those kids that had the it thing. And the late Jimmy O'Brien started helping him out, and changed his grip. It was pretty close to continental. And then the way how he ended up with the grips he had, and a lot of it was just trial and error. But he was so good in a deuce court, a one-handed backhand, hitting inside out. But the doubles turns into strokes. Always tease. You got to have a serve, and you got to have a volley. With
that Angela Buxton, when you mentioned her name, I was young then, and but I remember when she brought the group of talented young British kids over to train with us in Boca, and the facility. I remember she was very upset one night, and because the girl she had the most promise for, that showed the most promise, when they arrived at what was Seguso Bassett Academy, now the Everett Academy, we weren't all finished out yet with the dorms, etc. And I remember that story about her. She thought this girl was going to be the next great hope for England, and because of the young girl's inability to just kind of make the best out of things, she gave her very little chance of succeeding on the tour. And I've always remembered that, and I think that was such a valuable lesson for me, because I think it's so applicable even today that if anything, from a parental standpoint and a coach standpoint, the best thing we can do is put hurdles in the way of these kids and prepare them rather than protect them. Because if they do have high goals, it's going to be challenge to get to him.
If I'm not mistaken, they stayed at the dorms at St. Andrews Prep in Boca.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson, who's in the news, Tucker Carlson's father-in-law, last name is Andrews. He was the headmaster at St. Andrews Prep. He was the headmaster of the prep school I went to in New Hampshire at a different time. So anyway, I hit it off with him really well. I remember he really was close friends with Peter Burwash, and I thought that was a great setting. But I don't actually remember that. I remember the kids. I don't remember that one incident where Angela said that to you. So what, the pillow wasn't comfortable enough? What was the problem?
Yeah, the room didn't meet the standards, or something wasn't suitable, and
yeah,
I just remember this look on her face. I was just kind of keeping pretty quiet and observing, and yeah, I mean, it's funny how one of the boys in there, that Daniel Kiernan, who now runs or has the podcast, Control the Controllables.
Yeah, I remember Daniel. Yep.
Yeah,
I've heard Daniel on the podcast. He doesn't remember us, so don't lose any sleep.
No,
don't lose his sleep tonight. No, he talked.
I won't lose any.
He was talking about his experience, but my mother's expensive pillow is missing. I one time said that it was going to be a title of a book that I'm going to write, because a young kid, I remember I was off to go someplace and train coaches, and had to make a video or two before I left, and this kid walks in and goes, "My mother's pillow is missing." And it was Bud Schultz's son, Christo, had taken the pillow. He's in the room next door and said, "I think this pillow is very comfortable." And the mom and dad, when your kid goes off to a tennis school, a tennis camp, don't let them take a pillow. Just don't let them take a pillow. It's interesting when people come to visit, if they fly in versus a drive-in. I remember I was in Tampa for 15 years, and when we had students, it was very seldom that students were driven to us. They would come via the airport. I can't tell you how many parents went out and they bought a small fan for their kid. It's like, oh man, let them toughen up. With U.S. tennis, Coco Gauff wins the U.S. Open. Ben Shelton gets the semis. 3 of the men players were in the quarters. But then with Davis Cup, you think small country like Finland, 5 million people. Granted, you just have to have a small squad, but they step up and beat the United States for that last spot. It's kind of like with U.S. hockey, though. U.S. hockey is getting a lot better, and sometimes the U.S. hockey team can edge out the Canadian team. They've done it quite often on the women's side, but I always say, but the Canadians, they have so much depth. It'd be interesting, how much depth do we really have? How many quality teams could we put together? How many quality Davis Cup teams could we put together? Coming back to the doubles, the last time they played, Rajiv Ram was number 1 in the world, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
He was right up there, and he wasn't even selected for the team. And that might have been the reason that Marty Fish is no longer the captain of the Davis Cup team. Let me ask you this. You think that the Bryan brothers, they're going to get a comment like Robbie Seguso had for Jimmy Connors, because they're doubles specialists, that you think they're sitting in the chair, they're playing singles? I did see where Mackenzie McDonald, somebody told me that he sent a tweet out that I'm not on Twitter myself, but I guess it was on the TV coverage that, being coached by the best. But do you think any of that takes place at all? You think any of the guys are thinking, hey, I can't be coached by these double specialists, or what do they really know about singles?
I mean, you never know what goes through people's minds, but I feel like Bob and Mike Bryan probably have a lot of street cred on both ends of it for some reason. That's my gut. I mean, having watched them all the way from 12 on, play through juniors. I mean, they were 1 and 3 in the country usually every year, with Goldstein usually nestled in the middle of them. And I mean, like you said, I think everybody's aware that certainly Bob could have made his mark on the singles court, and I think they nobody really has as much tennis running through their blood as those two. And I think just from that end, and they're certainly, I mean, whether doubles or singles, I mean, I think that people are winners or they're not. And I think Bob and Mike Bryan are very much winners, and competitors, and in their own way, warriors. And, certainly McDonald could benefit from that. Whether he believes he can or not, I don't know. But, the competitive nature of those two was pretty high, I think.
Just here in the last, month, I've talked to Raven Clausen quite a bit, and actually scheduled to have him on a podcast. I talked to him about that. Of course, he'd be the first one to say that, well, my name doesn't need to be mentioned in the same sentence with the Bryan brothers. But how, what he would say is that all doubles players started as singles players. They all grew up.
Yeah.
They all grew up. And I always say, many times the second string quarterback becomes a great coach because they're around it all the time. They're standing on the sidelines, wearing a headset, carrying a clipboard, standing right next to the head coach. I know for years and years when Raven was on the tour and he wasn't traveling with his family, he would he'd just go hang out. He'd get his workouts in and he would just go watch tennis. But I do think that, and again, TFO, great player, it's unfortunate. Everybody goes through that, I think, once or twice in their career. Maybe Rafa might be the only person, I guess, who hasn't broken a racket. But no, seriously, I've heard that. I've heard that he's never broken a racket. And that's because
that's what I've heard.
Then it comes back to the grandfather, that not his father and is not his uncle, but the grandfather rules. And this is how you're going to handle yourself. But right towards the end, I mean, it might have been the point before, right in the tiebreaker, the backhand volley that he missed. So, and for our listeners, and we unforced error there, hit the microphone. We talk about TFO, we have the ultimate respect for him. But biggest word in the dictionary, if you could turn the clock back, it's like Tommy Paul as well. I mean, he gets extra play on that forehand side. But when he comes in, he has a much better chance of squaring the racket head out on the forehand volley than he does on the backhand volley. Both those guys. And
they're way better under net level on it.
Yeah. The one thing with, why don't you explain to the listeners why you say that?
Well, I mean, it's just, you see it all the time, even, TFO and a few of those players and what they share with so many young juniors. I talked about it on this little education video we put on Instagram and related to the two-handed volley and how it's just such a great gateway for somebody to learn to really stick a one-handed volley someday. And, the foundation of every shot being the grip, and so many people are, thinking they're actually hitting the volleys with, say, a continental grip only, one grip, which we hear a lot. And the reality is that from what I see day in and day out, that the people who their perception is they think they're hitting with continental grip, they're not even on a continental grip. They're on a very weak hybrid grip between an Eastern forehand where the bevel's on 3 and the 2. It's not even really the old composite grip. And the racket's just open. So people like that, they're going to love short drop volleys below net level. And they might have to use the word touch or feel when they're underneath net level. But I always tell our kids when somebody comes, you hear at junior tournaments, you should play to their forehand, play to their backhand, but everybody always relates it to the ground strokes, and nobody really targets a particular volley at the net. And with most players, I mean, you can draw them forward and just hit to a particular volley, and you can pretty much bank on what's going to come back. And You don't need to dip it down low when you have those kind of players. Just get it up at their ribs, up at their shoulders, and there's just no foundation there to support the ball.
And also, too, if you can make them hit it, they may not miss it, but run forward because they're going to finesse the volley. They're not going to stick it.
Yeah, it's coming short and cross.
Yeah, but
I was talking to George about that the other day, Steve. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
George Goldoff, and he really does a great job through the work he did rebuilding his game with you right around COVID, and he's continued to just do a great job of following up on it every day.
Is he is he deserving of the name Goldoff, or is it still Silveroff?
Is there
something
in between? Yeah. No, I think he's really impressed me with the way he goes about it, and his attitude towards it, and his willingness to just do drills with anybody and jump on the ball machine and spend an hour on there where it's set so much differently compared to the average person that jumps on it. George sets the interval rate so that the ball comes out about every 10 seconds, and then he really learns from every rep. It's pretty cool to see him go through that. And but I think if he can persevere and get the right doubles partner, I'm fairly certain he'll get to play at the highest levels, 2024 and hopefully beyond, if he can keep plugging away and keep making his dream happen financially, to get out there. And played Hitchikata, I believe that's at Rinky last week, and lost, but he's right in there. There's the lines are so thin.
Well, for our listeners, George Goldoff, I think he also was ranked one, ranked very high in USTA juniors.
1 in 18.
When I say that, my son Connor was ranked 2, but when he went to Kalamazoo, he wasn't seeded 2, which was 100% correct, because there's lots of kids that are 18. They're mostly playing ATP or ITF events, and sometimes their rankings not there. But nevertheless, George was a very good junior. Then he went to Texas, and that's a statement in itself. But for the listeners, it was circumstantial. I know that just quick on the story of George, his father wouldn't let him go try to play until he got his degree, and he needed some time that 5th year to get his degree. So he came to spend a week with me, but he was told to come see me when he was like 13, and I'd seen him play because he was at an academy where I trained the coaches. So when he came, I said, well, here's your reading list, and he's going to give hitting lessons, and I'm the wise guy. I go, well, who's going to be paying who? Because many times people get to give lessons because they can hit the ball. And I've said many times on these podcasts, tennis sparring partners, they shouldn't have a speaking part unless they have something to say. So then George, he was cannon fodder. He went out to Carson, and I said, no, you need to go. At that time, Matt Clore, who now 15, 16 years have gone by where he's been part of what we do. And I said, you needed to go to the USTA Center. They'd welcome you with open arms. But he went out to Carson, and cannon fodder for the listeners means you get to practice with the big boys. He's practicing with Stevie Johnson and Sam Query. And so then he would run into Matt Clore on the tour, and Matt would say, you need to take more time. You take more time. And then it was circumstantial that he had made the choice, I think, to be 3 months with us, but it was almost 3 times that were during COVID. And it's really interesting. He was there and he really started to understand the material, the substance, the information that supports why people should make changes, the science. It's really interesting that during COVID, so many players could have really taken time to work on their game technically, but they didn't.
Yeah, I think it was a great opportunity to it. I think I've said it before when I've been on the podcast that from my vantage point, it was one of my favorite periods of months where as a coach, because tournaments went off the table, and we were limited to one person per court And so I was doing a lot of one-on-one lessons, 12, 14 hours a day. And the court next door to me, because, at the beginning of COVID, you remember people thought you could get it off a tennis ball and what have you. And so there, everybody got basket of balls, their own like ball hopper. And I just had like 3 courts of stations. So they had to go through their lesson, go to the court next door, and then they were just rotating down. But it was about a 3-hour workout, encompassing their one-on-one lesson. They'd do their technical work, and then there was just follow-up, and then there was some fitness. But it was a pretty fun period because I think it was the absence of competition that allowed people to just embrace the changes they need to make. And but right when that whistle blew, and UTRs, I think, were first to come out with tournaments, and then USTA followed shortly after. And right when that blew, it was like Panic City again.
Well, the parents, the players, the teaching pros, everyone needs to understand that you have to have competitive spirit to change your strokes. I tell juniors, I said, this may be the toughest thing that you've done in your life so far, is trying to change your strokes.
Yeah.
It's, hopefully young people haven't had that many traumatic experiences, but changing technique is not easy. It's easy.
Yeah, Coach Andreas always says that. Yeah. He tells the kids all the time. He goes, this is tough for you because you haven't suffered or sacrificed yet in your life.
Yeah.
If you had, this wouldn't be that big a deal, but that's why it is.
But hopefully the U.S. Davis Cup team can bounce back. I'm sure they will. And I read some quotes from Bob Bryan today with, and Rahm, hopefully he can stay healthy. He's 39. He can play a few more years, 42, 43.
I'd like to see the viewership and see how that is for Davis Cup or Fed Cup, and just see what the typical numbers are for viewership on that. In contrast to, say, Indian Wells or any of the slams, or the Cincinnati or the Thousands, and just see if Davis Cup is even attracting the viewership anymore. Because it's sad to me that it seems like it's really become kind of the beauty of Davis Cup, the meaning of it seems to be lost. It's kind of like doubles. It's just been a deterioration in it seems. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think with let me say this, and then you can come back and ask the question again, so I'm clear on it. But with Austin and Rajiv, it's interesting that they played the doubles. That here they are, 1 or 3 in the world, and the singles players wouldn't have been asked, like, say, years ago. That's why Bob Bryan would play a rubber. The top guys wouldn't play. And I've met Rajiv Ram several times, but I know Austin Krajicek doesn't have an enemy on the planet. He's such a nice guy. Is that, I just cringe every time, they're out there and the juices are going. They're playing. The team is lost. Just think about being put in that position. And, but okay, they've been out there. They're playing 2 sets. I'm going to guess it's indoors for sure. I think it's fairly quick, and everybody's got a pretty big serve, all world-class players. And let's play a full third. Like, who makes that decision? I mean, if people love tennis, it's like, well, let's just play a 10-point tiebreaker. It just in every level of tennis, like this year, I mentioned it in a podcast recently, like the mixed, why was the mixed, gender to gender, no ad, and then 10-point tiebreaker. But go back and rephrase your question again.
Well, I'm just wondering what your thoughts were, because again, and maybe it's just my perception and feeling on it. It seems like in the public, the general tennis public, not necessarily people who are, 100% into it, as maybe you and I and some of the listeners are, and it seems like Davis Cup and the importance of it, the value of it is just deteriorated so rapidly over really quite some time now, it seems. And I would be curious to see the viewership, what the TV numbers show on people following it even at this point.
Well, Labor Cup's coming up, and I think it's been both good theater and good tennis. I've enjoyed being a fan of the Labor Cup. I've met many, many people that have actually gone to every Labor Cup, and they have certainly they've altered the scoring format, but it's tied into a team format. I think it's well thought out. It's very clever, and I think it's worked really well. I think with Davis Cup overall. And again, I don't even know enough about the Ryder Cup in golf to comment, but I think they should have kept the old format, but just not played every year.
Yeah.
Where, the Olympics or the World Cup, even if they played every 2 years, I know that most of the players that I've heard to, or I've listened to, the ones that are commenting on it, are the ones that played in the old system, and they like the old system better. But is that what you're referring to?
I think it. I don't know that, again, like so many things, so many adjustments that have been made bureaucratically, in the game. I'm not sure that the current direction it's headed is a good one. I'm kind of like you. I've always thought that it needed to be not held every year. Give it a little bit more of a prestige feeling when it came on, and it just seems to get lost in the tennis year now. Where when I was a young boy, there was just so much pride in the Davis Cup, and in fact, we mentioned Seguso. I remember, sitting with you when he was, his father, Art, was really upset because I know Robert never got the nod for certain things a couple of times, and Art really wanted him to get that, and it just seemed to be something that the players and the tennis fans across the world used to really embrace at a different level. I don't feel that now.
Yeah. Going back to Robbie, 85, I just happened to be in Germany. I certainly was not Robbie's coach, but with his brother Roger, they had read in the paper that I was in Germany. Roger did. And next thing you know is that I'm in a suite with a U.S. Davis Cup team. Everybody had their own suite. The money that was spent, the USTA dignitaries that was there. I've only been to 2 Davis Cup matches, and one was I was doing some work for the Roddick Tennis Academy, and I got some great tickets and went out with my son Connor. We watched in 2007 when they beat Russia in the finals. But Robbie, are you referring that he wanted the nod in doubles, or because I remember he wanted in the worst way? Becker had won Wimbledon like weeks before, and Aaron Krickstein was scheduled. I believe it was the last match. Get our fact checker on that, but Robbie wanted to play that match so bad. And, he without Aaron being there, he was telling Arthur, I can beat this guy. And,
yeah, that might have been it. Yeah.
And but he wasn't given the nod. He ended up having some knee problems, some injuries, but I think with a little more fitness, he worked with Bob Brett at one point and beat Connors at Wimbledon with. We should have a podcast just on our experience running an academy in South Florida. It's so many things. Make an outline and go, okay, this is how it goes. A few more things on Davis Cup. Andy Murray, it was his grandmother's funeral. He played and he won. His father, I know his parents were divorced, but he lived mostly with his father during his childhood. His mother was, I think, very, very active as a national coach with Scotland, and I think many times people think that his father was removed from the boys, but my understanding is it was just the opposite. But he said, and you heard this many times in situations, what would your grandmother want you to do? Your grandmother would want you to play. And I think what he did add, he goes, but you have to win.
Yeah.
I think that's what's so important. I mean, people come to see me for technique, but it's really, in the end, it's all about character. We'll get to strokes, but I got some thoughts here on Davis Cup. I said once in a podcast, maybe more than once, that we should sit in section F and eat popcorn and just shut up. But these are just thoughts I jotted down quickly. Like Frankie Danzovic is coaching the Davis Cup team for Canada, and I can't really say, I coach Frankie Danzovic, but I did video work for Frankie, and I saw him at a tournament years later when he was a pro, and I just went up and said, "Hey, Frankie," because the Maple Leafs was playoff time. Started asking him about the Leafs, and he looked at me and said, "You're the guy from the video." It was a small group of people in Niagara, immigrants. The top Canadian tennis players are immigrants, hungry dogs, and it was amazing. I should be able to tell you Bruno's last name. I remember doing video work for Bruno. It was tragic. He went to Kentucky. I think he was number 1 in the NCAAs. His baby boy was born like the month before he died in a motorcycle accident. But with Frankie Danzovic comes to my mind is Richard Hernandez, who's been a guest on our podcast, longtime friend of yours. Mm-hmm. Myron Grunberg, who I know you and I did a tennis workshop in Toronto one time. And so Grunberg is coaching Frankie. Now he's a pro. I mean, for our listeners, he had a win over Andy Roddick. He went 3 sets with Nadal. At one time before Dimitrov, Frankie Danzovic was called the poor man's Federer, or little Federer, because he had that type of game. And so what Richard did with Frankie's, because they were training at his club in Toronto, he said, "Frankie, you got to do this. Come in, you got to watch this tape." And I think Frankie was 11 years old, and Richard said, "You got to watch this tape." And Frankie goes, "What's this guy want me to watch this tape for?" He looks at it, takes a second look, a third look, and he goes, "That's me. That's me." But the Canadians, did you have a chance to see any of that?
I didn't get to watch any of that, no.
The college tennis, a shout out for college tennis. A young guy that Dave Secker talks to me about all the time, French Canadian who went to NC State, Alexis, can't really pronounce his name, Galarno. I remember seeing him play in Austria, in the same place I first saw Felix, the top Canadian, play. But he went to I think he's ranked, I don't know, I have it in my notes, like 162 or whatever. So the Canadians were 5-0. And then another kid, 6'8", who went to Kentucky because I guess Shapovalov and Dennis and Felix were injured. But the one great thing about Shapovalov is he was there. I think that's a lesson too for over the years. That was one good thing about Roddick and his group is they all went. The Americans for the longest time back in the days of some of the big names, they only went if they were going to be actually in the lineup. I saw Vicky Duval. It was not Davis Cup, but we have all sorts of film with Vicky, the changes that she made, but just circumstance. Once someone changes their strokes, the listeners need to realize they just can't say, "Okay, I got that done." You have to constantly continue to work, or you will revert back. But she's commentating on TV. It was the first time I heard her, and I sent her and her mom an email and said, "Hey, remember this email." I told her a long time ago I would help her to help her with being a TV commentator years ago, because she has this delightful personality. I remember telling Mike Costa that. Raven Clausen, he's done TV for the South Africans. But that's just one thing that was on my mind with watching it on TV. Nieneman was coaching. He's only, I think, 43 years old, 42 years old. He's ranked number 13. Here's a question for you. He's ranked 13 in the world. So he's coaching the Finnish
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
How does he do if he plays anybody in the event in one set? If you saw him stand up, he's still, it doesn't look like his body fat's very high. I mean, it looks like he's ready to go for one set.
Oh, I mean, for sure he could. Yeah, one set. He may not last beyond, but he was a player.
During the time that Greg Ruzetsky got to the U.S. Open, I believe he was in the finals twice. And, he certainly has a healthy ego. He was taught years ago by one of our students, Danny Cooper, worked with him a little bit. Danny said he had to serve from the get-go. He said, but his swings on his ground strokes were better at 14 than they were when he was in the U.S. Open final. He tried to get Ruzetsky to come and work with us when you and I were working together. That's a story in itself. So Ruzetsky's all set to come, and I go, yeah, okay, all right, yeah, okay, Danny, we'll do a pro bono. And then the father called up and said, what hotel are you guys going to put me up in? I need a rent-a-car. And I said, no, we can't do that. I said, we could put your kid on an airplane, we'll help him out. But Ruzetsky used to practice with Edberg in London, and said, I only played him one set at a time, but I wasn't winning sets from him. I think that
didn't Picard work with both of them? Tony Picard.
I remember Picard for sure. Such a highly respected coach, working with Edberg forever. He may have been. He might have been in the loop with Ruzetsky.
Both Edberg and Ruzetsky, it seemed like always had that similar move with their head leaving the contact point, the eyes leaving the hit early on their serve. And I talked to somebody, and I can't even remember who it was, years and years ago, and they said Picard, actually he tried to promote that movement. Where almost throwing the head downward a little bit to. That was something he. And again, I don't know if this is true. This is somebody that was from his area that said that. He thought that was a key component in the serve. Especially the kick serve. Yeah. Whether that's true or not, I can't validate it. But
with Ruzetsky, raised in Canada, but he did end up playing Davis Cup for Britain. But Tennis Canada, they're defending champion. Jim Rogers said on our podcast that, does anybody remember that? So yeah, comes back to your question, is that Davis Cup needs a boost, and I do think that that was one of the reasons for it to be changed.
Yeah, I hope it works. I'm not sure if it's the right move or not. Time will tell.
Again, these Finnish names, the young guy who beat Tommy Paul, Emil, I'll go with his first name, Ruusuvuori. I mean, that's terrible shot at it. But if people watch that, he's ranked 48 in the world. So Tommy Paul lost to a great tennis player, but the guy stayed in the pocket. The guy hit backhands.
Yeah.
He was not in that neutral area, the red zone, running around hitting forehands. Certainly, I need some help with his volleys, but overall, what a great ball striker. And I mean, it was great. It was great ground strokes, but then when the ball was short, I think Tommy, he's looking to end the point on the midcourt ball, even though he is coming in more. The Finnish player who won the mixed doubles, Hari, I can't really pronounce his last name either, but here's an interesting thing for the listeners, is that he went 4 years. He stopped playing, I think, I don't know, like 26, and came back at 30 or something, but he took 4 years off. And I just think that's another way to tell people, especially the parents with children, it's brain memory. Coming back to changing strokes, we'll talk about strokes here, is that, people have to deprogram, reprogram. And, so someone can, take some time off, and if they're healthy, they can get back in. And it's kind of like that expression, the brain will bring you back to where you left off, or it's like riding a bicycle. If people stop, okay, well, let me say that again. The brain will bring you back to where you left off. So for young kids, it's so important. And that, like you were talking about being away from tournaments, up here in the mountains, I think that's, definitely a concern, that, well, who are they going to practice with? Who are they going to play sets with? And um, it's very interesting. I can ask people time after time, when you came to visit, were you the best player here? And almost
Hmm.
every time it's no, but they don't really see it that way. Um, with
Yeah, it gets messy with that. Slows down the process.
Yeah, the but the connections turn into stories. Whether you know was with the Davis Cup or Vicky Duval or the tournament. Tell us about. I was going to ask you this. So I have this down. I just wrote down 15 names that over the weekend watching a little bit of tennis. And what I'll do is, um, during ball pickup, say, okay, pick the balls up, meet me in the lobby, and we'll watch a little TV. Ashton Kruger, I saw she was in a final. How's she doing?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been on court with her since January. She has gone full time out on the tour for her second year in a row, and I sent her a congratulatory note. And right before you called, right when you were calling, I was um, reading a note from her. I guess it's morning there now, Monday morning. Um, I thought she did a great job in this tournament. I was excited to see her playing really, really well all over the court. Thought she, you talk about people that just run around and try to get their forehand. I think she does a pretty good job at dividing the court well when she's behind the baseline in the red zone and in neutral, and her, primarily because her backhand in her mind is her one of her biggest strengths. But it's just how she was taught, like and I think that the maturity that I saw on the TV watching her this week um, was very evident. She looked like she um, was there enjoying the battle every single point, and um, and she was moving on from difficult points, difficult moments in matches, much better. Um, but she hits the ball pretty well, and her mid-court end game, I think, has not been as visible in the past year, and it's always been there, but she just hasn't used it. So it's kind of been this hidden area, and it seems like she's much more comfortable um, coming forward right now. And when she does it, her success rate has been off the chart. So she's getting in closer. A lot from my vantage point, watching, just primarily from TV, it looks like she is committed to not giving so much ground around the back of the court. I mean, she was just playing so deep in the court that by the time a short ball came, she was trying to make up 12, 15 feet to get just to the inside the baseline and then begin the race to the net. So
Well, one thing with
yeah,
Ashton Kruger, for our listeners, obviously, she was with you from what age? What, 5 to 15 or thereabouts? So
yeah. I mean, outside of a 18-month stretch from about 8 to 19, yeah.
with Goff, I'm a upstate New Yorker, so I'm a Pagula fan. Jessica Pagula, Buffalo, New York,
Mm-hmm.
where the real people are from. But Goff played 3 events. I think with Kruger, um, 20% of the money goes to doubles and you have to split it. But in her young career, the way her size, her mobility, she should play doubles with the idea that, okay, this is really going to help my singles. Um, I think what you said about Angela Buxton is all those things that add up, character 101. And this is certainly not addressed to her, but it's not a matter of, well, I don't want to play doubles or there's no money in doubles. It's like just do what's right, and going to the net is something that would really, really help her out. I do think with the brain, the way people are programmed, and the fact that how you were so involved with her game from the beginning, when you know and I know that one time she was not training with you, or she was, there's an academy, Nikki Johnson, who actually took lessons from us back in East Texas 100 years ago. He owns an academy, and she was there for a while. And I remember Dave Licker, he came to one time, brought a player to us. A lot of, okay, great coaches, there's a magic to it. We're getting some notes here on talking about Gilbert. He's got some magic, but with, you got to go back to the well. You got to go back to the well. And, so our parents listening is that people can go to another program. Like then she was with the USTA. Well, okay, they have better fitness, or they have, better purse strings, and they can take you here and there, and they've got wild cards. But even in college tennis, you're 500 plus more of kids you've coached in the last 30 years at Brookhaven, where you're based in Dallas, is how many college coaches keep you in the loop once they leave your program and go play college. I mean, if you had to put a number, one through 10, 10%, 90%.
Yeah, so I'd say 10. I mean, it's a rarity that it is. I mean, I've had kids right in this city that have gone to some of the marquee schools around this Dallas Fort Worth area, and they just don't do a great job. I put it on both all ends really. I think from the coaches and at college, maybe it's always sold that there will be a link and that will stay involved with it and get you back there. And then but the kids also, I mean, I tell, especially since cell phones, I tell all the kids that at least monthly, once a month, just film everything and send it, and I'll put it in the app, and boom, boom, boom. The whole process takes me 5 minutes and keeps at least their technical game in line.
Well, also just to hear the language, because it's they will not even hear the language.
Yeah,
I know, like Ty Tucker, he did a great job with my son Connor, but there's a language that Ty speaks that I think every American tennis coach should study. I mean, the intensity, the drive, the work ethic. I think the world of Ty Tucker, but the X's and O's and nuts and bolts. Same thing, just a routine in front of a mirror. But
yeah,
coming back to what was already mentioned on this podcast, skills, if you don't use them, you lose them. The 5 S's, anything that can be measured can be improved. S number 1 is self-management. Are you taking time just to shadow swing in front of the mirror? I mentioned on a podcast recently that Spencer Johnson's off to UCLA, and I said, find mirrors. Do this exercise against the wall, just tracing the swings. Takes just minutes. And you just think about what football players do, basketball players do. I mean, track athletes, they have routines to do. People grow away from that. So self-management numbers, there's numbers for strokes, there's numbers for strategy, there's numbers for stats, and there's numbers for score and rating and rankings. But coming back to this list, another Finn who was in the match that I wouldn't really consider a match, when certainly Finland was happy to go up 3-0, but anytime they, have it be that 10-point tiebreaker at the end, it's like, oh, flip of a coin. But coming back to the kid the 2 Canadians, one played for Kentucky, one played for NC State, but the young guy who played for Finland at the end, 796 in the world. I'm sure he's just getting started, and his ranking in singles is higher. At one time, he's ranked number 2 in Finland. I was in Finland like just 2 different times. It's such a small, beautiful place. But he played tennis at the University of Alabama. And at one time, maybe that's still accurate, it was a safe bet to say that 1 out of every 4 top doubles players on the men's side played college tennis. The parents of junior tennis players have to understand that college tennis starts with doubles. And if you can't play from the service line in, you're not even half a player, because from the service line in, it's more than half the court. But, one thing I read about this young man, first name's Patrick, so I can pronounce that name, but King Kovalata is when Niemann retired, he was big buddies with Federer. And I remember the famous hockey player, Timo Solani, was playing.
Mm-hmm.
He's a very good tennis player. Great hockey player, retired. And
he lived out by Ivan.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Surretz.
Yeah.
The Ivan.
Yeah.
I thought you meant Ivan Lendl.
Yeah,
but our
Yeah.
Ivan's better than Lendl. And Lendl only got to the 8 U.S. Open finals in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But no, he played 1 point in front of 13,000 people in Helsinki against Federer. I have to find out if that's actually true. Who would think of this guy's going to come out and play 1 point against Federer? But, so obviously that was a pretty small stage, even though it was on TV. And I mean, they're playing for their country. But this thing for our listeners, the 2 Canadians and the Finn, they all played college tennis, and college tennis starts with doubles. And, in junior tennis, I mean, all you got to do is look at somebody's ready position, and they're not ready for doubles. It's interesting. The tennis world's a small place. Austin Krajicek gets the mixed doubles final with Jessica Pegula and Jeff Coetzee, who you helped me with years ago as a little kid. He lived with us in Texas. He's coaching.
Yeah.
He's coaching. Here's something that when I think of Rajiv Ram, you got to mention Joe Salisbury. I met his college coach, Paul Gobel, a really good guy. He's actually working for Tennis Memphis. They've hired him as a tennis director, and happy to hear that he respects the curriculum, the GreatBase. But I was told he never served volley. He served volley at every point, never stayed back singles or doubles, first or second serve. I have to ask him that. That's what we find to interview him. But also, too, with the parents is that I believe it was a year and a half. He had some sort of illness where he couldn't play while he was a junior.
Salisbury.
Yeah, Joe Salisbury. I mean.
Yeah, I saw him shortly after that playing. He got a wild card into a challenger, and gosh, it's going back quite a few years now, though. I think Connor was playing then.
I was with Connor in Hawaii one time, and he was playing with an Irish guy. I think his last name is O'Hare, a red-haired guy. Mm-hmm. I think he's actually coaching now. I think he's coaching Joe Salisbury.
Yeah.
And, I just remember that all these guys from Memphis, and, Memphis has had, they had very respectable teams, but yet it wasn't the brand name. It wasn't one of the top marquee schools. And it was kind of said in jest, they played at the University of Memphis. But they're both going strong in tennis, and especially Salisbury. I mean, let's talk about Gilbert for a minute. Coaching Coco Gauff. There's some definitely magic about Gilbert. What's the first thing comes to your mind? I got some notes here on this.
Well, I think people have the ability to get people to believe in themselves. I mean, certain people, and he, I think he coming aboard, he has a way in dealing with some of those athletes. I mean, I think he's a very clever guy and jumping aboard the right ship. But one of my favorite Gilbert stories that I think sums it up. I think he realizes the importance of some little things that, when he took Roddick over and told Roddick, hey, I'll do it, but you're going to get rid of the visor and put on a baseball cap and look like an athlete. And, a week and a half later, I think out in Scottsdale, I believe it was, Roddick ended up beating Sampras. And so I think, these people that he takes over are, he has certainly helped him get a few more steps closer to home plate. There's no doubt about it. And he has a magic, I guess you could say, about getting him there and how he does it individually with each one. And, but it'd be interesting to see him take, Emma Raducanu right now and see where that ends up in a year and a half.
No, that's a great thought. Anderson, I can't believe you got it wrong. Sampras. I'll go to the fact checker. Sampras.
I got it wrong.
Andy Roddick beat him in Miami. And
Was it
let
Miami?
me go off on a tangent on that. Andy Roddick. I think it's Jeremy Wertzman beating Andy Roddick at Kalamazoo in the 16s, and then a few years later, Brian Wilson was working. Brian Wilson was working with us. He didn't come to this coach's workshop I had, but Jeremy came and helped me out with it. So they go to Miami, and Andy Roddick is on the pro tour. So Wilson and who played at Illinois under Craig Tiley, who's mentioned quite often in his podcast. So, and I think of Rahm won the NCAA doubles with Brian Wilson. Brian Wilson had a palm up serve, just like Andy Fitzell helped JJ Wolf with the palm up serve. So, Brian was sent to work with me, and they came and stayed with us several times. I had a place in Florida where people could stay with like 20 beds, but with Andy Roddick is the best junior in Boca. Andre Agassi gets divorced. And then he actually says that he was stalking Steffi Graf. So he's in Boca, and who's he hitting with? He's hitting with Agassi. Shows up in Boca, and he's practicing with Andy Roddick. So Andy Roddick's practicing. He's starting to take sets from the legendary, one and only Andre Agassi. So that's that opportunity where you get to believe in yourself. So then right after that, the months go by. I mean, a guy could put it in some chronological order because Andy, I believe it was the Orange Bowl and the Eddie Herr. It's like, he was really, really good, but all of a sudden, wow, he's winning. He's like winning these top junior events. I think he was 21, so he's a year older than Shelton, who got to the semis. So he's 21 when he wins the U.S. Open. And I know, coming back to the visor, Andy, at one point, Andy was like, "Oh, I was such a moron to be wearing that advisor." And I think he was also using some of that stuff that you and I don't need to make your hair stand up a little bit. Some gel. But so anyway, Pete Sampras did say to Roddick, or about Roddick, he's really good, but I'm going to beat him when it counts. And shortly after, he played him in the U.S. Open, and I wouldn't say it was a clinic, but Andy certainly handled that. I should say Sampras really handled Andy. But coming back to Gilbert, he does have that ability. I think he's a coach. I think that he's one of those coaches that coaches out of love. And I think it's very difficult to coach out of love initially when you're in the grassroots level, you're in the trenches coaching 20 kids at a time that have the wrong grip. Gilbert himself says, "I don't do grips," but I think that most of us in tennis, I've trained coaches for a long time. I've always said, go with respect first and love second. But when you're working with marquee players, you're coaching her. She's already top 5 in the world. But a few things about Gilbert's story is that, his sister Dana was older and a pro. His father always told him, "You're going to be a great player." He was very small, grew late. He ended up having a very good body for tennis. Long, lean. Another unforced error with this microphone. Tough, Anderson, you're a young pup. I'm almost 70. It's might fall.
I'm not far behind you.
I might fall out of his chair pretty soon. But anyway, I think he went to Arizona. Could be Arizona State, but I would bet Arizona. Comes home and ends up going to Foothills, and Tom Chivington's his coach. And he says it's the best thing ever happened to him. And then from there he went to Pepperdine, and from there, I think one of the inside jokes that he lost in the NCAA finals. There's been many players that have lost in the finals that did better than the person who beat him in the finals. But this is what I've got in my notes. Reading some things and listening is Gilbert was with her 42 days. Before Goff wins the U.S. Open. Joe Paterno, and I really feel bad about how Joe Paterno's life ended up. The former Penn State coach and Sandusky and everything, had the outfit Go the Last Mile, and all the child abuse was just awful, horrendous. But Sports Illustrated at one time, the title was "Don't Give Joe Paterno 42 Days." That was just the title. And Joe Paterno had 42 days to prepare Penn State to play the University of Miami, Jimmy Johnson At that time, I think, what were they calling it? Linebacker U. There's
Yeah.
so many positive things about Penn State, but and Joe, I remember in Key West, I was the only person in this bar. I had to watch that football game, and I just as a kid, a guy from my hometown, Paul Johnson, played for Penn State. I was always a Penn State fan, but so she wins Washington, she wins Cincinnati, and she wins New York City. So he said, "Hey, I made it fun." Winning uglies come up is that I think Gilbert, you know, there's a lot to be said about winning ugly. I think, you know, you and I come from a technical background and have to tell people over and over again, pretty strokes are just part of it. You know, technique can be overrated. I mean, you need a lot more than, good looking strokes. But he said he made no major changes. That was a quote. And he said a little strategy. And then, but he said, I just told her it's all about problem solving. I do think in her speech from the podium, John Wertheim, the writer of the New York Times and Sports Illustrated, it's on 60 Minutes. I think he was right when he said that she planted the seed. He planted the seed for her. Who hasn't been questioning her forehand? Everybody.
Yeah.
It's been everyday commentary. With but I think the relationship, I remember watching Roddick. I think Roddick has like one of the best sense of humors. I mean, if you just listen to interviews, I know Vic Braden goes, well, I really don't like Andy's sense of humor. I mean, I used to say with Dennis Vandermeer, his sense of humor, I like his sense of humor as well. What Dennis would say is, you don't have a serve. And what Vic would say, we don't have a serve. He would self-deprecation. He would, I think that's what good comedians do, is they make fun of themselves first so that they make fun of everybody else. But I can remember Roddick practicing with Gilbert. I said, okay, I'll watch this. And I've watched them practice many times when they were together. That's the nice thing about being able to be in Miami or be here, be there around the tennis players is he used to just, they'd be hitting and Roddick would just say, are you sure you were 4 in the world? So I do think that, I love listening to him as a commentator.
Yeah, I do too.
With, and her forehand, certainly with our listeners is that if you're starting your child out, you'd want to start out with a clean, ready position and not have such an extreme grip. But, you can work with a player and you can work within a player. And certainly 42 days, you're working within a player's game. You're not. Yeah. Then also too is that he went in and he said she's got a great team. And it would take somebody who really knows technique to be really clever and to do it in a, very subtle way, making adjustments here, make adjustments there, to help her with her tennis game. I think of Dennis Vandermeer years ago. I mean, someone had the ready positions she has, and he would say, okay, let me teach you the drop shot. Let's work on the drop shot. Let's have you have a sneak attack, throw the ball up high and come in, and let's have you just play a volley. And so, well, now do this. He wouldn't address that, well, on the unit turn, this is where the angle of the racket face is. And, I think someone who's as successful as Dennis, I've been making these videos for a long time, and in a lot of ways, they shouldn't even have to be made. There's too much verbiage. Because what you have to do is you make the video as a tool of persuasion. Let me show you, kid, that, the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming right at you. Because typically parents have shopped and bopped and they've heard so many different theories on forehands and backhands. What else comes to your mind with Gilbert?
Well, I think just to go back to a comment you made a little bit ago about, winning ugly and getting Coco Gauff over the finish line with what she has kind of in that 42-day span. And, we doing what we do in dealing with a 12, 13-year-old, 10-year-old, 17-year-old, whatever it is, who's looking to, try to get into the college system in some capacity, whether it's D1 through 3 or NAI or JUCO, like Brad Gilbert had to play, or went back and played. We have kind of a ethical obligation almost to try to fill in the weaknesses at that point in their lives a lot more than a guy like Gilbert or some of the guys that are out there, for the 40 weeks a year where they're, trying to manage the emotions of a player and get them match ready and take the role of that type of coach. So it's confusing because I think that, when we see a 12-year-old and they're just not even close, and the parent thinks that it can be done in a similar manner to how Gilbert, say, manipulated Goff to having more fun, to not worrying about what people think because everybody thinks you're not as good as you're currently performing in this tournament. And I think parents get confused, and it's hard ethically to not address some of the things we have to address and really be a stickler on them, and we don't have that luxury of pouring out a lot of love. It's not a luxury that we're granted often, because it seldom gets done like that, especially in this day and time.
Well, Philip Farmer, Philip Farmer better than I do. Last time I saw Philip, he was at your place working with a junior. And for our listeners, he's coaching Austin Krychek now, and he coached the Bryan brothers. And I mean, he's a really upbeat, he's a motivational guy. I mean, he's going to make you feel like you can walk on water. And there's a lot to be said about that. Austin Krychek has been a better tennis player than he's allowed himself to be for a long time. He's, it's great that he's just persevered. He's hung in there and he's getting his due now. Certainly it's a nice thing to win a major, but for people outside of tennis, where you just say, yeah, it was number one in the world. I think it was Steve Denton, who you and I know really well and worked with. He was number 2 in the world. And, Austin would just smile politely. He would never chirp and say, "Hey, Denton, you were only number 2. I was number 1." But Philip Farmer, our listeners very quickly, one of our students who you helped me with, Timmy Hurst. The guy had such clean strokes. He played at SMU. I believe he's a banker in Boston now. So Timmy, he lost I think it might have been the consolation finals, but he lost to the Cotton Bowl to Philip Farmer. And his father was a brilliant researcher. I tried to explain to him. I said, Dr. Hurst, Timmy, you got the trophy, but Philip just killed you. He was just in every situation. He just missed volleys and overheads. But no, I think with Gilbert, common sense. I do think to define. Coaching is a human relationship. With teaching's information transfer. The late Bobby Curtis was really good friends with the Roddick family. And, you hear why did Andy and Brad go their separate ways? And I had heard, he wanted, lots of money. I can remember the British Tennis Federation gave Anico and they gave Gilbert, I don't know, it was something like they gave Gilbert $1 million a year to coach Murray at one point. It was just few years back, and it was just insiders talk about how much crazy money that was. But with Gilbert, with Andy, what Bobby Curtis told me is he wanted Andy to go see someone else on how to volley. Brad goes, now you won the US Open, now we got to teach you how to volley. I heard that. And with Andy, I think if someone, he has children now, if someone could sit down and go, "Hey, Andy, I remember when I was with you in Boca Raton, and it was a young kid by the name of Jason Hazley. And he's the same age.
Played at LSU.
Played at LSU, loved tennis. Parents relocated from Canada. And, they played several times in little local tournaments, 10, 11, 12 years old. And I can remember Andy Roddick coming to our place, not for coaching, but we just they had like 4 12-year-olds. Okay, you guys go play a round robin. And, we were coaching Hazley, but we weren't coaching Roddick. And I'm just thinking that guy is so competitive. Many times, I've had a lot of conversations with Matt Clore. He's worked with a lot of top players. He says Coco Gauff's most competitive player that is in America, and Taylor Fritz is second. And even though if Taylor Fritz doesn't volley very well, he goes, "That's okay. I'm just going to hit the ball down your throat anyway." But it is hard to, unless you really have early on, the parents really get it. They're in the end, they're the ones writing the check, and they drive their kid from point A to point B to say, let's work on this. And some other notes I have down on YouTube. It's amazing. The grandmother, both grandmothers taught Coco Gauff, but when the mother was a school teacher for 19 years, and she stops teaching. And I mean, they put a lot of things on the line. And the dad was successful in business, and she said, well, the grandmother's in this short video. She says, well, I wasn't worried about my daughter. I was worried about my daughter and I was not worried about my granddaughter. I was worried about my son-in-law, my daughter, what they were doing early on. With, but, they really sacrificed. Mother's a gymnast. I think people all know the story. Father's a basketball player. The father said, you read into it, but he said, well, I think I could have gone further in basketball, but my father wasn't like me. What does he mean by that? I've heard the father say that he's embarrassed. He thinks back about how hard he worked his daughter, but kids are resilient. And I think that there's a lot of love. That expression from a coaching standpoint is hate me now, love me later. A lot of people don't understand it, but there's the fitness clips. There's clips of her boxing, playing basketball. I think this is important for our listeners. They studied other families. Families versus federations. Families get tennis players down the road. I think this is important to share with Coco Gauff. The mother, she said, I got to a point where I said, and I told my daughter, off the court, I see you as my daughter. On the court, I see you as a professional. And there's a little thing about like at this place in Boynton Beach, Pompey Park, and Calusa Park. I mean, they just work so hard. The Fernandez girl from Canada. I mean, the whole family, same thing. With let's talk about the other coach of the winning player in singles, Goran. What comes to your mind with Goran?
I loved watching him play. I'm fortunate to see him play a few times, up at the Open. And unbelievable serve. As a coach, I think it's surprising to me that, he has some thick skin because he was such a fiery individual. And at least on the court, and, to take some of the tongue lashings that are coming from the court with Novak is interesting to me. I mean, it's just no other sport do we see this, and certainly is getting worse, not better, for the players lashing out. I always keep waiting for Goran to respond, and maybe he's just such a class act. He does it in his own way behind the scenes to stand up a little bit for himself. But I think he certainly. I never really would have picked him. Coming out of pro tennis, and his incredible ending to winning Wimbledon, and I remember Tylee telling a story about that. I don't know if Tylee was there at that particular Wimbledon or what have you, but I remember him saying how there was that Goran was just like it was a vision quest for him when he was there. It was almost surreal, and he was just shadowing in the locker room before the final, just bouncing and shadowing. But I never would have picked him as a player who was going to go out and coach on the tour for some reason. I don't know why I felt like that, but he's had an amazing run with Novak, and um, hats off to him and all those guys. To be able to endure the stuff they have to endure day in and day out there. It certainly isn't for everybody. I think that people coming from other sports backgrounds, like you have, like I have, it's very strange to see players just assault coaches on the sidelines. It's very difficult for me to even begin to think that that's the world that I'm in tennis, because it just didn't happen in any other sport. I mean, it was the reverse, and I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it, and I think it's a little bit of a cultural decline, a peak at our cultural decline in our sport. But the player's paying the coach, and it's kind of a version of what happens in junior tennis. I mean, coaches become very, very hesitant to tell the truth to the players, because even in junior tennis, because they are the ones that are receiving the check. And, you told me this back in the 80s when I was, had hair and really didn't have a clue. And, I remember you didn't just tell me individually, but you told 100 of us that, you got a coach like the player, like they're dependent on your money, not the opposite. And, I don't know. I never pictured Ivan Isavik being that guy, but apparently he is.
Yeah, I think with talk about interviews, he was a great interview. There's a video, the Journeyman. Maybe you know the name of the young man who he played doubles with. He had a video, and it's called The Journeyman.
Yeah, it is. I have that DVD.
And he played doubles with him, and they asked him. He said, "What'd you think about playing with your partner?" He said, "First time, last time, and never again." I mean, he's a great interview, great sense of humor. So I could agree with you on that. That he certainly seemed when he played that he really lacked discipline. He was so emotional, and he was so close to winning Wimbledon, and then when he did win Wimbledon, I mean, he basically. I have to go back and look, but I think he got down on his knees after he lost the first 2 match points against Rafter. And, kind of put his hands together like he was praying. But I think also I agree with you. A couple things that you said. The truth. There's a lot of great people in tennis that don't know the truth. They don't know forehand from a backhand. They really don't. And they've been in the game their whole life. It's like the line from Moneyball. I've been in this sport my whole life, and I know so little about it. I just think for myself, I could mention many, of our pillars or other coaches, but by the time I was 26, to be trained by Vandermeer, Braden, and Van Horn, that's a pretty strong combination that most people don't have any background with people like that. I mean, one thing that Goran said about Novak, he's one of a kind. And so to me, so is Braden, so is Vandermeer, and so is Van Horn. He's is one of a kind. It's like in their whole, everything from their whole life, comes into being who they are. But anyway, when you teach the truth to someone, okay, they're an intelligent person. Now they understand a lot about the nuts and bolts, but then do they have the guts? Or better yet, can they find a way to be clever enough to deliver the truth? With for our listeners, I mean, Craig Tiley, this might be the first time someone is listening to this podcast, but Craig was started like you did, David, a student, and then he was a student assistant, and next thing you know, he's doing this, that, and the other thing. But I'm sure that, I mean, Craig, in the position he's in now as the CEO of Tennis Australia, that years go by, he might be able to tell you, I've been at the last 22 Wimbledons. He might have been there with when Goran won the Wimbledon title as a wild card. But, I think people forget that he also coached Silic. And, I think he said, hey, Silic, talk. And I remember Federer saying about Silic, talking about playing, because before he changed his serve or after he changed his serve. So he got Sillage to lower the toss and toss into the court more. I mean, with that lefty serve, he worked with Bob Brett, and Bob Brett was a disciple of Harry Hopman. So it's like we're going to repeat. So I mean, a guy like Goran, Wimbledon champion, but also too, um, they have so much history together. Just think about you know, a Croatian and a Serb. I mean, it's just history. Just the language, so many things. But what Novak said, or excuse me, Goran, with just doing a little homework, is he said it's constant stress with coaching Djokovic because he's a perfectionist. He says he gets like a late night call and he goes, "I got to hit more backhands tomorrow. I wasn't happy with my backhand today." And whether that's practice or the match, and he goes, he says they have a great team, and everybody in the team goes, they thought the backhand was just perfect, but yet he wants to go hit more backhands. And he said it's the same thing with the serve. I know Warren Pretorius, who owns Tennis Analytics, talks about the team giving him late night calls on finding out where his next opponent serves because they have that type of data. But one thing I heard Goran say that you brought up is that he goes, no, there's a lot of yelling and screaming, and we have to fight for things. And, so it's not like he's just the one yelling and screaming. I have, witnessed many things where it's just the player yelling at the coach. But I think if it's like intervention, I know with young people that you've worked with over the years, you've been involved with some interventions like, okay, get some key people, all the people in the inner circle, and lock the door and no one's leaving. Yeah. And, I don't think junior tennis players have any idea. I mean, it's like I tell people really don't know how to get better. And the college coaches, I mean, I think they also confuse the junior parents too, because the recruiting process too is too much like a courtship. It's too much like a romance. And I mean, maybe I'd be the worst college coach in the world because I would just say, "Hey kid, you come here, we're not going to let you play for the first year. We're going to rebuild your game." And I think the college coaches walk on eggshells. I think some people, they do that once they sign. I think of Chad Burial, who was with us, and he won a national championship. And there's a girl from Canada, and it was a really fun story. She was bad-mouthing this coach that I've trained. Frank Hornig. Yeah, he teaches tennis really, really well. You probably remember Frank, right?
Oh yeah.
He got in tennis late, German, a banker, and great technician. And I told Barry, I said, "Don't say anything." But when she gets here, when she was there, I said, that guy Frank Horning we talked about. Now we're going to teach tennis. We're going to teach you the same way he teaches. And actually, she played. Not giving her name out, but she played tennis for Brian Shelton, and Brian Shelton told us it was the best, most prepared player he ever had. But what Goran said is that he fought the battle. I'm paraphrasing on this, but that he didn't want the box communicating with him. I think that was a mistake with Alcaraz. I mean, it's just like the crowd is loud. Anybody's ever been in Arthur Ashe, and then they got Mary Jo Fernandez, who speaks Spanish. The TV people put her down courtside, and now they're telling us in our living rooms at home where the serve's going. And I just think, are you kidding me? I mean, there's a brain drain at every level. It's just like, oh my God. But like say when everybody and I think it was in many ways a great tribute to Kobe Bryant, and everybody's putting the shirt on. It says 24, and it just said 24. That didn't mean that he would necessarily win at that time. But okay, maybe he'd win. He didn't win this past U.S. Open, but he's going to win 24 sooner or later, and he's going to have a tribute to Kobe Bryant. There's a lot of NCAA teams that'll have T-shirts made and baseball caps made, and I've even know that someone bought one at Marshall's one time. Said, "Where'd you get the shirt?" "Well, I bought it at Marshall's," because the losing team, they had the T-shirts made, to be the NCAA champions. But he did say in one interview that that's something he fought for, is not to have so much craziness And, he said, I want little or no communication from the box.
Hmm.
Craig O'Shaughnessy, obviously people have to promote, and Craig promoted his time that he was in the Djokovic camp. But I read where Goran said, no, we don't need him anymore. And there can just, and I would think that one of the reasons is his promotion. With But when everybody in the booth, they show the booth over and over again, they're wearing their ISOD shirts with nice collared white pullover, and Goran is sitting there with no shirt on, arms crossed, and he's not out of his chair. He's just staring at the court. But again, as a fan, I think he certainly puts himself through a lot of stress. I think that it's more difficult to sit there as the spouse or the parent or the coach than it is to actually play.
Yeah, I like him. I mean, I like Evgeny Svick just through the years. He has active eyes out there when he's, his eyes are like a shark at a shipwreck.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just wide, and you can tell he's just hyper observant. But yeah, I would imagine behind the scenes that he's not keeping his mouth completely shut.
Yeah. I think it's family. I mean, that's with someone's really lucky if they have an uncle like Rafa Nadal.
Yeah.
Most people have an uncle that are bringing you candy. It's just things are just the opposite the way they should be. Just the opposite. We have a young kid here visiting. His grandfather's with him, a great guy, and the grandfather brings him good and plenty. And I go, oh my God, my grandfather, Mikhail, he brought me good and plenty. It's like, who can turn good and plenty away? Only the better Ivan over here in the corner can turn away the sugar. Okay, let's talk about stroke reduction for a minute. Systems.
Alrighty.
A system is an organized plan. I put it down. There's a system for filming. There's a system for grips. There's a system for this. There's a system for that. And I think that's where tennis coaches and the parents should know, in the football culture, what happens. I'll rattle off some things pertaining to grips. Okay. A thing comes to mind is a computer sticker. Put a computer sticker on the grip. And Marcy Glidden, who was a teaching pro I trained many, many years ago from Houston, I still have it. She designed it where you take the computer label and then the numbers are just right on there. And she designed it perfectly. With grips, to take a dime and tape it on the racket. I can tell you there's several students over the years that I said, okay, let's take 3 months minimum. And we're going to, put a dime. And the next thing you know, you can look at their base knuckles, their index finger where that dime needs to place. And you can seriously see the imprint in their skin, whether it's heads or tails. That's a system, using a pen or a straw where, okay, now we know that you have I'll say an Eastern forehand grip, or you take the Velcro. You can buy this from the company in Dallas, On Court, Off Court. And I don't even know the name of it. Grip placer. You can use tape. I do think the number system, when you put the computer label on, for me, and I didn't learn tennis through osmosis like a lot of young people first start playing. And but the V is more, to me, the V is like, well, here's where the V is for the forehand. Here's where the V is for the backhand. To me, it's amazing. I don't think people are even taught grips, but the number system where there's 8 panels. But coming back to one thing I didn't mention about Goran is he said, here's 2 more points, is Novak wants all the details. He wants all the details. And he said, don't ever make the mistake of telling him that he can't do something. And, just to me, that's where, you can't listen to just the courtside interviews.
Yeah.
You got to dig. What comes to your mind when you think of grips and, system with grips?
Well, I think we're getting further away from it. I think that, to me, it begins with education of the people that are teaching. And I think that, there's not even harmony in that regard in terms of just knowing, okay, what is recognized. I mean, as an Eastern backhand grip, a continental grip, an Eastern forehand, a semi-Western and a Western. And I think there's still not, we're not close to harmony on that. And if the people that are, putting rackets in kids' hands and teaching them how to swing at a ball, can't really find common ground on that. I mean, it's insanity, really. It's, as you know, you've been at the house where Connor stayed in Allen and Texas, just north of the city here, and they had still have one of the best football programs in America. Their high school program can beat many college teams, but I used to go watch the kids from, fourth grade, third grade, at Ford Park out there, and they'd be training. And so they had a system that those kids were going to play once they got into high school. And that system was being implemented to the youngest kids playing recreational football in the city. And so by the time they got into their freshman year or sophomore year in high school, it was just second nature. And tennis can very much be like that. You had a post, I think, a few days back on Facebook about the soccer, the education of coaches. I forget what day it was, but we got to get harmony on it. And I don't know that the USPTA, USPTR is the answer. It seems these days that many people, I mean, a majority of people coaching tennis, I can tell you, in the city aren't even USPTA certified. So I don't think that's the answer.
Well, the transition balls, well, the low compression, the ball bounces lower, people won't have extreme grips, but that's not working either. And when that was put forth, they are great training tools, but there's no science. Okay, there's no research, there's no history that, okay, we're going to produce better players because of and again, they're great training tools. I mean, you play mini tennis, hit soft, service line to service line.
Yeah, I mean, I use green dot balls more with, it seems like, perceived advanced kids for different things.
Yeah, no, I had some kids yesterday. Same thing. I didn't even like the sound of it. I wasn't even looking at it. I go, guy, I yell out, I don't even like the sound of that. You put some guys over there, 100% with your feet, 50% with the racket, and Welby Van Horn, they're not playing my song. So yeah, let's get the green dot balls out. Then we go start doing double hits. But I think one thing with grips is ramifications. That's where if someone comes to you and, I mean, they're only 8 years old and they've been playing with a Western grip, and then you meet with a parent and say, I want you to do this every day, is, just like brushing your teeth, is take the racket, put the ball against the racket and rub against the wall upside down. I should say up and down. So you have a curl in the wrist and you have a different grip, and say you have to do that every day. And then also too is that it can't be instruction destruction, where we got to take some serious time, unless it's a rare individual and it's not going to be an 8-year-old. That would be just an amazing exception to the rule that they're not going to revert back. Even kids that have been schooled from the very beginning, their grip's going to go underneath, and they have to come back for some cleansing. They have to come back to, okay, let's work on technique. That pyograph is, you never ever stop working on technique. The piece of pie becomes smaller and smaller, but you tell people all these little routines. We have visitors come, and I say, okay, call me in 2 weeks and get on the phone with your parents. And I said, it won't be able to make you feel bad, but it'll be, just like a typewriter, boom, 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 that I'll ask them question after question, and this is going to be no. Are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? With filming system, that's a system. Is we're going to film on the first day. We're going to film 3 angles. We're going to date the tape. We're going to make sure that you're centered in the viewfinder. We're going to make sure that we capture your toss. It's going to be a courtesy feed. It's going to be a predictable feed. We're going to try to make you look good by, for example, giving you that courtesy feed right at waist level, ask you to hit down the line so you have the longest possible hitting zone, have it be a very slow frequency, very little movement. And for us, I mean, that's a system. That's an organized plan. This is how we have to do it. Then we have to file it. And then that's where the process begins. But that's where I think, with stroke production, the system, you have to record how people hit. And, when the players are younger, I think the parents are best to be proactive and say, okay, we have to practice this at home. I think a lot of parents say, well, I don't want to be the parent who climbs the fence. And, not to beat up on parents. I mean, Vic Braden used to say, well, if they can afford their lessons, they're highly intelligent. Unless they have a money tree in the backyard, unless they inherit it, socioeconomic functioning levels. But, I think with school, I mean, the parents, you can't trust the PTA or excuse me, you can't trust the red brick building. You need to be active with the PTA, the Parents Teachers Association, and find out, is your kid in the 7th grade and have a 3rd grade reading level? And people don't know that in tennis. They think, well, it's almost like a local 10 in our tournaments. It's like a group of non-readers. It's almost like they don't even know the alphabet. Coach that worked with me for 15 years, Roberto Calla, he would just say no information. Any thoughts that come to your mind when you think of filming? You already did mention a college student could send you film.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because we have a DK Pearson kid that just went off to college. DK Pearson, the hungry dog who you always talked about, and the crop that just went out. This kid has sent me video weekly and every stroke perfectly filmed, just side angle, but even slow motioned it for me. I didn't even need to put it in the app and I actually, after the second week, I said, it's so on point because this kid was just really clean. And I said, hey, it looks great. I said, why don't you send me a video of you playing a match? But I think that the way with filming, to me, it's just there's just no way around it. I have that TV I set up right on the court every day, and I like that. I know a lot of people. The iPhone or an iPad is easy access to, and an iPad's certainly better than a phone. But the bigger the screen, the more vivid it is, and I just think it's more eye-opening for everybody. And so, to me, not only the filming, but taking the time to just do it right on the analysis. And as the club is getting renovated here, I had to clear out. A lot of things have changed. I can't wait for you to see it. It's almost there. And but I had storage areas that are now knocked down, and in those storage areas, there's probably, I don't know, 300 VHS tapes. And in the old days, 30 years ago, we used to, each kid had their VHS tape, and then, the date was on there as to when they were filmed. And so I'm going back as a project here and putting old VHS tapes in and having our students watch them, because in my opinion, many of those kids were more disciplined in regard to everything, the grips, the swings. I think that, and again, it's not like the good old days thing. It's just that I think the system then was cleaner. Kids didn't, they weren't getting on airplanes every weekend to chase points. They were playing one major zone a month here, and then they'd play hards, clays indoors, and if they were really good, they'd play Easter Bowl, Orange Bowl.
Oh, there's been so many changes. That's a great idea to go back with Coach K at the basketball coach who retired recently from Duke said, "Oh yeah, kids today are bigger, stronger, faster, but they're not tougher, and they're not as athletic. I mean, now they're not playing as many sports." You mentioned big screen up here at the resort, Wintergreen, the mountains were. we're getting, we have the big screen and we're going to put it down courtside. You're right. The bigger, the better. I one time was in Japan, actually, someone who you started out. I think Richard Bodian, part of our network, did the most hard yards, or I heard you say dirty work. It really helped Hubert crash with his strokes. I think I probably ended up spending the most time with Hubert because then he became a teaching pro and he was in Japan, and so I was over there several times, and it was amazing. It was like this tennis facility had an auditorium, and the further back the audience is, the larger the screen can be. And so I had a translator, but I'm critiquing strokes, and I'm up on a stage, and the player hitting the ball is the same size as me.
Yeah.
A lot of times I do video and I say, this is very distorted. I just take my hand and I put it right over the video. I go, now you can't even see the player. Like that, that distance from, someone at waist level to knee level, the unknown territory, almost nobody gets the racket below the ball. Almost nobody. Braden, until the end of his life, where he did so much research with the brain, is that he always said that was the number one tip. The number one tip at the end was, I come back to this thing about the big screen, is fake it till you make it. Act as if it's a powerful tool. Make the other person feel like they're going to lose, and they start making decisions in the wrong part of their brain. So that expression get in their head. But anyway,
go ahead. I was going to say, when you sent me out to Koto once to have the chance to spend a week out there when Vic was teaching, and I was just grabbing anybody that wanted a lesson, because obviously I didn't get paid. It was just, there was a kid that was hanging around there, and I was teaching him into the late hours of the night, just because when the exposure to information was so incredible, and then to just try to be able to maneuver it and put it in play. And Braden was walking, to his house by the court, and he stopped, and he that was what he said. He said, "Hey, it's a great swing. He's just got to get under the ball more." And he said, "You're going to find that's the hardest thing to do over your career." Yeah. I'll never forget that. Yeah.
But what I did with this group of coaches is I had the coach come up with this huge pointer, and then I had the translator translate what the coach was saying. And I said, no, that's not right. No, that's not right. That's not right. A lot of times when you go in and the coaches are comfortably sitting in their seats and you're giving out information, but they actually say, okay, all right, let's get the staff up here and, one at a time. And then what I'll do is hear what you have to say, and it'll be translated, and then I'll translate it back. And that's not harmony. It's like, okay, let's go through that. But also, DK Pearson story quickly. So our listeners, Dave and I are at this 2-year college, Tyler Junior College, beautiful campus. And we had a curriculum to train tennis teachers. And at one point, the players were not allowed to be on the team. And so DK Pearson, he comes from Iowa, and he came there to study tennis, become a tennis teacher, and play on the team. And he was a good player, but he wasn't a great player. And I said, well, you have two choices. You can stay, get the degree, learn how to teach tennis, and become a really good tennis player, but you won't be able to play on the team. I said, I'm not in charge of the team. I said, it's unfair. It's not right. Because we had a 15-hour lab, and the coach, convinced some of the administrators that you couldn't do both. You couldn't be on the team and you couldn't be in the program. It was actually Peter Dixon who actually stayed in that area. He was on the team, scholarship in the lineup. So the same coach had gone to from Tyler Junior College to UT Tyler. It's Fred Niffen, the late Fred Niffen. And obviously you have to give Fred credit because he brought that team up, and they won many national titles at Tyler Junior College. So anyway, now Fred, he left the junior college and was across town at the school. He was playing NAIA, University of Texas at Tyler. And TK Pearson played the nationals after he was at the 2-year school. He went off to another school, and he played Peter Dixon, who was on the team that he wasn't allowed to practice with. And he beat him 6-3, 6-3, national tournament. And I remember his mother calling me up, and those are the stories that keep you going. I mean, there's
Yeah.
that psychic income that and yeah, as you said earlier, if people are doing it for their money, they're not going to be a good coach. Sorry, if they're doing it for the money, they're not going to be a good coach. Bottom line. On stroke production, we're not really going on the forehand. You must turn your shoulders high, low, high, inside out. But I've written down 10 things. I'm going to guess that there's only one that you might not know. So I'll give you that one. 4-1, Vic Edwards. That's a tough one. The rest
Say
of
it
them.
again.
It's a 4-1 ratio. Vic Edwards. The other ones are just like music to your ears. 19.1.
Well, 4-1. I mean, I know from a fitness standpoint, or what do you when you go for, what you put in 4 times you can lose in that one.
Yeah, there's lots of ratios. Perhaps that's 15 minutes on the backboard is equivalent to an hour. But Vic Edwards is a coach. Yvonne Goolagong she supposedly had to practice 4 hours for every set she could play. And
yeah, I've heard.
I didn't keep track of that. But these for our listeners, I mean, this is just the language that David knows backwards and forwards, and so does his staff. 19.1, 360 divided by 8 is 45, 130. I should call these off. Number 1, 19.1. Number 2, 360 divided by 8 equals 45 degrees. 130 degrees. Number 4, 78, 39, 13. Number 5, 3 to 6 milliseconds. Number 6, approximately 70 milliseconds. Number 7, plus minus IP. Number 8, plus plus, minus minus, minus F. Number 9, plus minus. Just on a few of these, I remember meeting with John Embry. And he just retired as a CEO of the USPTA. And I said, Mark Twain, I could learn from all 15,000 members of the USPTA, but I said, I only think there's a handful of people in the whole organization that would know 360 divided by 8 equals 45. And that's turning the racket 8 times. It goes in a full circle. And, when you hear that, you change the bevel by one panel, it's 45 degrees. I mean, that should get people's attention, especially if you don't know it. But for our listeners, in our world, I told kids all the time, I diagram a tennis court and go, okay, do you know these numbers? And if they don't know the numbers, I look at them, I go, I really can't have a conversation with you then. If they don't know the court's 78 feet long, there's 39 feet to the net, then it's 13 steps, 13 times 3. This is a good with a bad. I mean, a coach I've trained is at a D3 program and very excited. Nick White, he's actually been a guest on our podcast.
Yeah, nice guy. Spoke to him once. I owe him a phone call, actually. I'm glthis just reminded me.
But with, he's at a tournament, somebody that, he's known for years that I coached. And actually, this player has sent some kids here from his neighborhood, so he's doing a very good job teaching in the summer. But he's serving and staying back. And, that's just something that's a stroke production, but serve, volley, serve 1, 2, 3, split step. And if junior coach is listening, he said, no, we're not letting anybody serve and stay back. And people say, well, what about when they're 10? No. What about when they're, a girl? I mean, no. The shape of the swing, the shape of the court, 19.1 degrees, how wide the court is. And you tell someone, well, you move back, you have even less. And your swing, we looked at it on film, it's going like a merry-go-round. It's going over 270 degrees. The ball's rotating like a Frisbee. That really comes back to Braden. Why do you talk about 130?
Well,
130 degrees.
Yeah, it was the only area of the court that I felt pretty comfortable in. This morning, I didn't feel real comfortable in it, but I always just like to use the basketball analogy. I mean, you got the ball to win the game, and you have the option on a 3-pointer or a layup, and all you need is 1 point. And I'm taking the layup, and on a test, it's to me a no-brainer. that's why I was really excited when you mentioned Ashlyn Kruger earlier. How I felt like it was a match where I felt like that was her intent, even if she didn't get up there every time. That was her intent, to look to take court away, and whether she's being more effective in the yellow zone, which around the tee are only 30 degrees, but or she was getting into the 130 area inside a good volley position. I just think that everything is intertwined in the development of a tennis player, and I think that the reason people don't want to get into that area is because they haven't got into that area. You used to always say people eat at McDonald's because they eat at McDonald's, and habit is habit. And the comment you made earlier about Roddick and Gilbert splitting, and Roddick finding somebody now who was going to teach him to volley. I mean, the reality, if he had just systematically approached doubles differently and consistently from 12 years old on, that conversation may have been a moot point. Maybe not. But I think that we're seeing less and less. I hope it circles back around. It seems like lately when I watch a lot of women's tennis, it seems like many of the women are going forward more than the men. Muhova the other day, she didn't execute it well, but she certainly got a great all court game and looking to go forward.
I do think with her, I think I mentioned it before for listeners, is that I think, a little shy, and if she could have more time on Arthur Ashe. I mean, Austin Krajicek, he's one of his interviews courtside was, I think it was when they won the semis. This is the first time I played on this court. It's definitely a different court. But the 130 degrees, Novak against Medvedev, talking to an old time coach, David Getz from North Dakota, where you're from, and he's talking about athletes. And I actually, when I hear that, well, we don't have enough, we're losing athletes in American tennis. I said, I don't buy into that. I mean, as great as Medvedev it is, I mean, what character, what speed, what fight. But he's standing too far back. And I think Djokovic was 16 out of 18. I mean, he started hitting that slice serve, and it was just like a piece of cake to come in, and he had it's like he had a nothing volley cross court. I do know that the TV commentators here in the U.S., it's too positive. They edify the players. I mean, come on, they're great players. All the intangibles, all the character, but just from that one tennis math 130, then we get into people want a review of the information. The aggressive air margin from Bill Jacobson. You win 2 out of 3, turns in 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12. It's all building blocks. But do you teach elbow in or do you teach elbow out on the forehand volley? I mean, do you teach a really strong continental grip, or do you understand that most of the top players don't say what they do or do what they say, and they don't volley with a continental grip on the forehand side? But if they do, I mean, I don't know how many times I saw the picture of Johnny Mack. I binged for 4 or 5 meals, lunch and dinner, and I watched all those macro places. And they show, as you walk into Flushing Meadows, there's a tribute to all the players, and so it's a really nice plaque, and it shows McEnroe hitting the forehand volley, and the elbows raised and the racket face is flat. And it's right there. I mean, that's where once you see it, you always see it. But unfortunately, people need to be trained. What comes to your mind with 3 to 6 milliseconds?
I mean, I think I mentioned it before on. I mean, that could be almost a point of origin for everything in regard to, and then go backward from it. The human being, whether it's you or I or Fed or anybody, that ball's on the strings that small amount of time that it's gone before we even feel it. And I think that understanding that one concept for people, you would think, would really shut down a lot of the inaccurate information that's being given out. But I mean, I can't. It was in the last week. Some match I was watching, and on TV. The commentator said they really kept that one on their strings a long time till the player committed. And, so the general public is just at the mercy of the mechanic, I think. And the efforts that you're making with trying to educate the educators is really critical, and it just needs to fall on the ears, and it needs to spread virally. It's funny, fake news, spreads so much quicker than reality, and I think that's a little bit of what happens inside of the tennis teaching profession.
Rumors
seems
more,
like fake news.
I like that.
Go ahead.
Fake news, reality. Rumors more exciting than fact.
Yeah.
I think with the parents, Roger Federer said it quite well. I was fortunate to have the right coach at the right time. A family that I've worked with for now almost 10 years, if not 10 years. And their youngest son is a really good tennis player. And after they came to see me, they never went to a pro or a program. They did it on their own. And anyway, he's being recruited. And I talked to John Roddick, Andy's older brother. And John Roddick is a great coach. I mean, with he's got the juice. If anybody ever saw him play, I mean, I mentioned I had talked to him in a while. It's not like I really know him that well, but I did a little work for the academy. But when I was there, he was with his brother, and at that time, Jimmy Connors. But he recently had one of our students, trainees, associates, Gary Needleman was his assistant. The tennis world is a small place. There's always these connections. But I mean, he would be excellent for the player that is they're recruiting, because he went through all the ready position, turn, shadow swing, hit off a cone, trace your swing against the mirror, and did it for years. And they just know that, okay, I have to stay with this. I don't need to change my strokes, but okay, I'm going to be in this environment, going to be part of this culture. Most junior tennis players, they have no idea what even takes place in a locker room. It's just a different world. How about the aftershock? How about the 70 milliseconds? That leads to some confusion.
Yeah, I mean, the registering in the brain and the human. I mean, it again. I think everything, whether it's the 70 milliseconds, the 3 to 6 milliseconds, I think to me it goes back to earlier what we talked about with filming and getting it on a big screen and just stopping people and showing them where things are where they really are versus where they think they are, and when things are happening. And perception is reality for people. Their perception is their reality, and I think as you play this sport and you just try to figure it out, it's a very, very, very difficult sport to piece together. And if you're almost better off doing it that way though than listening to the myths, and because the brain's tricky. I mean, everything is counterintuitive in this sport to the brain, and I think that the more that somebody understands what is happening, that the better chance they have to remedy their situation, whether it's a tactical or technical flaw. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's enough knowledge. I haven't been aware of things, take the 10 points that you've just given. They should be on the USPTA exam.
Yeah.
And they're not. And there's nothing like that.
That reminds me, I was just asked by someone, they want a copy of the United States Tennis Academy, the exam that Vic Braden had. So I have all sorts of things in files, but they're not digital. Your serve, plus, minus, or IP, what was your serve? young
My
Dave
serve,
Anderson, your best days.
my serve is IP for sure.
In play, that means in play, everybody. Plus is strong, minus is weak, is in play. That's just Jacobson's language. So,
I mean, it's definitely not a plus. My second serve is definitely a minus, and my first serve is basically in play. And when you talked about Robert Seguso, Robbie, and I remember, he had retired at that point for how long he'd been retired? A year, maybe year and a half. He had
not very long.
a little out of shape. But I remember I was at 4-3 with him that one time down at the Mission Bay courts, and on the changeover, I was talking smack to him, and he referenced. He goes, you're in top gear. He goes, I've got 3 more gears to go up, and he said, your first serve is worse than my second serve by 10 miles an hour. And but he was right. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And but I think that, again, going back to systems with these points you're bringing up here, having video analysis of match play with stats is the only way to validate it. And because it's just, people just can't swallow the pill anymore in terms of hearing criticism just straight out of the mouth. I mean, opinionated, even if it's accurate, it seems like everything has to be really, really laid out. I've said it before, subtle doesn't seem to work in this day and time. You almost have to hit them over the head.
Well, the level of parenting, I hate to say it, but the level of parenting's gone down. It's like, well, okay, my parents did a better job than I did. I mean, that's straight across the board. Sorry, mom and dad, but it's not pointing a finger at a certain person. But and again, it adds up. It's society. You and Robbie Seguso at the Net Post. It was good theater. I was upstate New York. It was my mother years ago, and a couple of friends of mine from the area down in Connecticut. Said, hey, and I timed my trip up north to go to the Sampras Federer match in Madison Square Garden. And, Sampras hadn't played in a long time. And I mean, it generated lots of money. And I know that both players had donated lots of money. I think that's where, anyway, there was a point where Federer just hits 4 aces. So it was good theater, not good tennis. There is a situation with trash talking where Pete Sampras, it shouldn't have been in Andre's book about, Pete being cheap and this and that. And Gilbert was in on that, and it was just not done well. And so, it comes out and they're playing an EXO, and Fed and Nadal, you can look at it on YouTube. And what Pete should have said, hey, Pete, what you should have said, hey, Andre, I gave $100,000 to your foundation. So they were way out of line doing that. But we all make mistakes. So yeah, it comes down to Jacobson with, a winner is a plus, unforced error is a minus. I think we should call it a loser, not an unforced error. You hit 19 losers. That's where it's scary, where crummy plays crummy, or everyone's heard that, and crummy doesn't know they're crummy, but they win. But just how the point ends, it does come down to stroke production. Why did you miss? And then at the end, do people know their differential? What's their plus minus? Go ahead.
What I started doing a few years back, and I did it last week. I hadn't, how you get something good and then you kind of forget about it as a coach, and then it resurfaces in your brain suddenly. And so I've had like 2 or 3 kids watch a match or a set, and I'll put 3 ball hoppers out there, little stand-up ball hoppers, and they'll just chart the set by, one of them is putting a ball in the unforced error hopper. The other one is putting the ball in the forced error hopper, and the other one's putting the ball in the winner hopper. And then that's how they chart the set. And the players just come, at the end of the match and look at the hoppers. And it pretty much tells the tale right there.
Oh, that's a great idea. Say that one more time.
Well, we take 3 empty ball hoppers, or you could use little buckets or whatever. And I have, kids that are they're watching, charting a match by putting a ball in the appropriate hopper. One of them's just labeled unforced errors. The other one's forced error. and then the other hopper is the winner hopper. And so they just drop a ball whenever, at the end of the point in one of those hoppers. And at the end of the match, the hoppers tell the tale very, very quickly. And, you can do it for each side. And, yeah, it's a fun way to do it. It illustrates it really well. And I don't think people, forced error category is such a separator, I think, forcing shots.
No, it's a great idea. Harry Altman used to do that. He would take 10 $1 bills, and when you make an unforced error, one bill goes to his left hand. Now that he's got six bills in his left hand and then 4 in his right hand, and they played until one player won all 10 points. Yeah, I think with stroke production, say Madison Keys, Mark Novak, he does a great job with the recovery in certain aspects, and he has all sorts of things on the internet, and he comes out and says, well, Madison Keys, if you want a big backswing on the forehand, you can have a big backswing. You want a short backswing, and he's not wrong, because the way the brain is programmed. Now, if I walk by Bjorn Frantangelo, I would just be a familiar face. I'd have to say, hey, Bjorn, remember me? But I saw him in juniors, and my son Connor played against him, played doubles with him, and I just watched him grow up in tennis. He's a kid from Pittsburgh who went to Naples, and they're scheduled to be married, and he's coaching her now. But then the question is, okay, she had a great U.S. Open. She can hit a serve. She can strike that forehand. But that's where, for the listeners, it's a different call now. She's been top 20 for a long time, but if a player had those technical mistakes, and they're in their formative years, they should go back and take some time off from tournaments and work on form. Like, say, with Andy Roddick, I don't like to think of Andy, you say, was a one Grand Slam wonder or whatever it is, but no, that's not fair. And I'm trying to correct saying majors, not Grand Slams, because a Grand Slam is 4 in a row. But not only did he win a major, but he was number 1 in the world, and for how long he was a number 1 American. He won Davis Cup. But if you turn the clock back, you could ask Andy Roddick, would you want to have your child, learn to volley the way you learned to volley? And it's not a matter of placing blame. He's in the Hall of Fame. There's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame. And then, but when he talks on TV, and he's on TV on a regular basis now, you can't really, in a lot of ways, put numbers to what he's saying. As far as, the angle of the racket face, the grip, the size of the backswing. That the parents should just need to know, and the juniors as well as Joe Public. When you're watching pro tennis, you're not watching developmental tennis, and you're not listening to developmental tennis either. I got another list here for you. 3-point landing. Yep. What do you got?
Well, I think that, I don't know if the listeners are aware of what it is, but
yeah, just to find
somebody, when somebody begins to swing and taking the step out, and the 3 things really dropping in sync, the racket head, the rear end, and you take your step out and into a ball. And going back to Braden, people just don't get under the ball, and synchronizing the body and the racket, just to maximize the swing, maximize the kinetic chain. I think that I was showing some people this the other day with Alcaraz, how, and it was just to show that he was twisting upward, lifting, rotating, elevating, and showing in the knees, because it's in this, even in slow motion, the first times through, they missed it. And I said, I put on the TV screen, I just took a marker and just put a dot where his knee was, and then showed it a few frames later and showed him where his knee was. And, in essence, it was still the 3-point landing. It was really a semi-open stance, but, the racket face falling and the body falling, were still occurring even though the ball was hit at, really a rib level, right above the midsection. But those things still occurred on that ball. And I think that, again, I'd say it's a pretty misunderstood part of the swing. People don't get their body and racket synchronized that well.
We just had a physician here, and I like to ask physicians, how old were you when you started to get a significant paycheck? You know, they're not saying in their 20s. They're saying, they're well into their 30s generally. But I told them that, I used to orchestrate a 15-hour lab, a weekly lab, and we would just practice tennis teaching. We have dedicated 1 or 2 podcasts to Jim Laird, and we interviewed Jim. And I certainly was happy that Jim was pleased with the podcast we had, going back to his work. And, it's been years since he's done what he used to do, running camps and what the ideas for mental toughness. A couple of things with Alcaraz, when you see him invert the racket head, people have to understand when you're looking at YouTube clips, you're looking at one shot. And, does he do that on the return? Does he do that on a conventional volley? Does he do that when he's hitting the ball on the rise? When he has extra time and they invert the racket head, and there's been so many players before him that do that, they're adding a segment, and it increases racket head speed, and it helps them keep the racket on the same side of their body. But, you say, well, we're going to start teaching 8-year-olds to do what we saw in a YouTube clip. Very dangerous and very wrong. We had the 3-point landing, I think, of Medvedev today, or Jimmy Connors years ago. Get behind the ball and get set. Review, people have asked for review and stroke production. 3/8 system of balance. What do you got?
Yeah, well, Welby Van Horn, heel, hips, head. From an athletic standpoint, an athlete has to first master static balance before they can really master dynamic balance, where the body's under control in the full run. And static balance is becoming less and less a part of junior tennis programs in America.
I would say it's next to instinct.
Yeah.
Static balance, listeners, means you stand in one place. Mom and dad put up some full-length mirrors and have your kid. They brush your teeth, hopefully 3 times a day, but at least twice. So they leave the house in the morning before they go to bed at night. They're in front of a mirror for a few minutes, brain switched on. But yeah, you're hitting the ball really well if your swing allows you to stay on balance. Most kids have such horrific swings, they can't stay on balance. A power line on the serve.
Yeah. We were talking about Cilic earlier and how even Ivanisevic impacted him. I love that side-by-side footage they showed. I think it was, I can't remember where I pulled it off of.
I remember showing that.
It was the arc on the serve toss and how it was forward and radically changed, obviously, after Cilic won the U.S. Open, or before he won it. And anyways, I think that, you can go back to a lot of things. I think the power line on the serve is critical. The forward line that a body achieves, that so many kids that are playing tennis today are playing tournaments too prematurely. They're chasing points too early. They start out of they start a negative habit at a very, very early age of getting cheap spin, bringing the toss way to the left, not bringing the toss out in front, and it sticks with them forever. And then it's compounded by the fact that nobody is serving and going forward, and even in the pro game, there's quite a deficiency in it, I feel. There's obviously people that just get it out there in front and out to the side of them a little bit and are launching missiles. But I go ahead.
Well, thanks for mentioning that with Cilic. I remember showing that. It's a great clip of his old serve and his new serve, the power line. What's at the end of the power line, the serve. Anderson, I'm going to have to start being nice to you here. I mean, now I know why people really like listen to you. I love that comment, cheap spin, because the listeners, when a right-hander tosses way over their head, they they get some spin. The height of the ball, the trajectory goes higher, and the ball bounces higher, but they don't have any speed. Um, the Here's one. Actually, could ask you about Paul Wardlove. He's scheduled to be with us next. I mentioned that his name to the listeners, but it's tough to ask people during the U.S. Open to take some time and be on a podcast because there's so much great tennis going on. But one thing you also mentioned about competition, the Russians, for the most part, you got to play 3,000 hours before you play. Get 3,000 hours of practice in before you play. And,
Yeah.
That's where the USTA, and again, a lot of great people, a lot of great causes, a lot of great effort. But that whole theme, it's not learn to play, it's play to learn. That whole USTA contingency watching the Davis Cup. Sorry, fellas, but there are mostly guys there. Don't want to just pick on the guys, I can pick on the gals. But if you could turn the clock back and go, not today. We're not saying, okay, TFO's got to go back to the drawing board. The South African, Wayne Ferreira, has done a great job by just getting him off the cell phone. But I remember telling Paul Roeder with the USTA that the Sam Queries of the future don't need to have the same grip on the backhand ball that Sam Query had. But yeah, something has to be done. American tennis. Inside out, what comes to your mind?
Could you repeat that, Steve? I couldn't hear it.
Inside out. Inside out.
Inside out. I mean, what comes to my mind is where the racket path on great swings goes from, high, low, high, inside out. I mean, when a swing falls, dropping to the inside slot of the body, and then as the player rotates and lifts and, getting way out from their body, way out to the right. I think that common term that I think people use now in today's junior tennis world jargon is spacing. You always hear about the word spacing, and I think that many times that word is used and ineffectively because the person is actually swinging outside in, and it doesn't really have to do with the footwork placement of the athlete, but the swing path is going outside in. I think in the junior tennis world as well, when you say inside out, people only have the correlation between that and moving far to the left to hit a forehand. That I think is the more common way that people associate the term inside out. But
let me make a comment on that. Inside out. Reason to mention Paul Wardlaw is that he's made a great contribution to tennis, talking about directionals. And now it seems like everyone's forehand. Years ago, we used to do an exercise. Okay, play this set. You can only hit forehands. And we don't do it anymore because that's all people do anyway. Is too many. Vast majority of kids are just looking to hit forehands. With inside out used to be a technical term that means to swing from close to your body. You think about an Agassi or Jim Courier. At one point, maybe it still is. Jim Courier's company was called Inside Out.
Yeah.
It's now then what's come of that? It went from a technical term to a technical term, and now it's inside, outside, inside. I mean, it's like, come on, it's adds to confusion, I think. Contact point. We have a boy visiting here who has just a little bit of an extreme grip on the backhand side. Therefore, the racket head is not aligned to the target. And sometimes he leans back to compensate. Sometimes he leads with his elbow, or a combination of both. Mentioned Jim Lair. He had that drill where you would rally and you would say where the contact point is. What percentage of juniors do you think have a contact point that's above their waist, rib cage, or at shoulder level? Which one would you pick as the the
I,
most
I mean,
prevalent?
yeah, I mean, from what I see, um, not necessarily just juniors I work with on a day in and day out basis, but I would say that, in the red zone, in neutral positions, um, people are, somewhere in the chest and above. And um, sometimes it's just a byproduct of the grip, and they feel like the racket face is easier to get vertical, up there, but sometimes it's just poor footwork. But yeah, not often waist level. People aren't
Yeah,
striking in the strike zone.
I would say, sadly, shoulder is 1, rib cage is 2, and waist is 3.
Hmm.
Um, especially on the forehand side. With
Yeah,
what comes to your mind to share with the listeners on hitting zone?
hitting zone. I would say two things on it. That from day in and day out, what I see is people are closer on. They have a, you know they're closer on their 12 to 18 inches on the hitting zone on the back end, especially when they even kids outside of that have grown up outside of our system, they track better on that side, as a whole, and obviously they tend to play more balls around waist level too. Side they're taking the ball off of the court on the way up more, rather than letting the ball peak and drop. And the hitting zone on the forehand side, um, overall, I think is much less for people. Um,
Yeah,
I think it's reduced.
it's where the listeners, where the racket face is vertical, it's lined up to the hit, strings facing the target. Kids shadow swing and say, okay, if you could go 18 inches to the width of your shoulders, Andy Fitzell, people are lucky. You'll say they're lucky if they get 6 inches, but it's so important. What comes to your mind to share with the listeners in reinforcing these concepts? Swing shape and
Hmm.
court shape. What comes to your mind?
Well, it goes back to the earlier kind of 10 points of dimensions of the court, and the 19 degrees is just a sliver. It's a tiny little space to fit the ball in, really. And so when you're red zone baseline to baseline, I mean, nothing exciting. The racket's got to match it, and keeping the racket up high at the beginning and letting it fall in that circle really matches the court. And um, the angular finish that people perceive. I mean, where the pulling, so to speak, that they see, especially on forehands. It's with world class players. It's so much deceleration with the racket at the end and recovering, and but yeah, it's interesting how people are just, there's just, like we've talked about it many times. The backhand side is just never really the debate point with it, because we could stop many players and they're going to have a very similar look, even in the world class play. And you look at the tracking motions on them, but the forehand side is where it tends to get a little goofy with people. But yeah, the swing's got to match the court, and the best it can. It doesn't, you can learn to hit a ball anyway, but if you want to be able to put it on a dime under pressure, and the circular swing matches the narrow dimensions of the court.
How old are your grandsons? 6 and
Almost 6 and almost 4. Yeah.
Benny
Yeah.
and
Benny and Bodie. Bo.
Benny and Bo.
B-O.
So the toys listeners, where you get 3 spaces, and one is for the circle, one's for the rectangle, one's for the square, and um, young kids can figure that out. Yeah, the shape of the swing needs to match the shape of the court. You already mentioned this one I had written down. Kids are smart. If you ask them, go, hey, stop and think about it a little bit. Should we teach you what's happening or what's happened? And, again, the kids are smart. I ask that question quite often and they get it right. Yeah, so let's teach you
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. the contact point. That's the moment of truth. Strings don't lie. Why don't you expand about this? Comes to your mind, stroke production related, power sources and control mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, you'd mentioned Madison Keys with power sources. I mean, Alcaraz with the racket head at the beginning of the forehand and adding segments to the kinetic chain. And I think Keys is a great example of, it's definitely she's creating racket speed. I mean, her ball speed has matched many of the players on the ATP tour for years now. But it's when it comes to control mechanism, it isn't there, and it isn't there for, unfortunately, when she most wants it, and she's cracked at some big moments, and inevitably that side really does tend to crack, and much like Goff's forehand, I wouldn't even say her current flaw is really a power source for her. But people want to learn to hit the ball with the bigger body parts, the least amount of moving parts, and keep the wrist fixed and really learn to coil the body and use the big body parts, the shoulders, the lower body, and so you can not only hit it big, but you can hit it big to a target, and that it's got a better chance to hold up under pressure. It's a lot of people hit a tennis ball like needing you can drink a Red Bull for an instant boost of energy, but it just won't sustain, and that's how a lot of people seem to hit a tennis ball. That's where fitness is so key. I mean, to hit the ball well, you've got to be fit. You got to be able to do the right thing with the body over and over and over. And so a player that's going to learn great strokes, they also better put their time into the fitness.
Yeah, I'd like to say a little kid, say Vinny, 6 years old, you get him to hit the forehand really well. He may spin in a full circle because he's not going to be strong enough. Braden used to say that, have the kid wait, don't swing until I say swing, and then that downswing. Okay, now you're riding the Ferris wheel, and they go up, and their body spins out. But power and control, listeners, are really one and the same. The ball doesn't know it's being hit by a forehand or backhand. So on the forehand side, if someone can use the left arm, a righty, as a reactive break, and one of the coaches who's worked with you forever, Dion Krupe. I just remember all these little things. And Krupe, Dion didn't want to let kids hit with their jacket open, and one reason is their jacket goes flying. So their forehand, when their left arm pulls out, they think they can hit the ball. They're certainly exerting more energy, and they think they can hit the ball harder, but they can actually, if they could decelerate the front side. Same thing with the serve. People misinterpret. The elbow, say if it's a right-hander, the left elbow is going to come down eventually and help people propel themselves going forward. But initially, the left arm has to stay up. So it's really interesting too. Easy power. Getting young people, and that's really interesting about so many great players. Their parents played, or their mom or dad was a teaching pro, and they started at a really young age, where they didn't have any muscles. I think again, so many kids just hang onto the racket so tight, and they don't let the racket free fall. They don't work with gravity. I got one exercise I need to do, go through this fast, but here's a question for you. We have immersion camps up here in the mountains. Who do you think should come to our immersion camps? Who should priority number one, parents or players?
Well,
depends.
Yeah, I mean, for an immersion camp, I mean, you could argue you could have separate ones for each.
Yeah, or they could come together. I'm just teasing, but
yeah. I mean,
someone who you've got to know really well, Holt and his father George. They brought their young son Mason, and then I got to meet the twins and the mom and the family. Is with great family, but tell Holt he needs to come for immersion camp. The kids can stay home. Anyway,
Yeah.
the young.
Yeah. I mean, I mean it. I think you've said it before. Every situation, such a case study. Um, and in some cases, I need more parental involvement, and I think even in the course of training the same family over 10 years, I think it changes the dynamic, and it takes a team for sure. To me, that team has to be intact. But I think both parental education. I've said it for decades that I thought the USTA could send a really straight shooting guy like Jim Lair around to all the cities, and really just have a parent education program in all the major cities, and on how to really help navigate. I mean, basically right out of his parent player coach handbook.
Oh, he's got 17 books. I have, as you know, you were there so many times, if not all the times, with Jim Lair.
Yeah.
I guess you were there most of the time, so I was a little bit older and did this or that with him on the road. But you got to talk about stroke production. In Jim, on these
Mm-hmm.
private educational tapes, we would run 10-hour. Actually, they weren't 10-hour; they were like 25-hour. Actually, I have to stop and think about that. But be yeah, it was all weekend long, and it's just my thinking has changed because now when you have a workshop with people, you're lucky to go 10 hours versus 25.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I have all sorts of private tapes. Jim Lair, you won't be mentally tough if you are number one, you don't have strokes that hold up under pressure, and two, you're not physically fit.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank Giampaolo, who spent time with Vic Braden, he was down the road, and he still teaches tennis in Orange County. He's made major contributions to the game. And I read his book, which I would recommend to parents. But I asked Frank about it. I said, as a fellow Bradenite, what would Uncle Vic think of the book? You don't mention strokes. And he told me, well, people wouldn't read the book. Or, you do create controversy when you talk about strokes at teachers' conferences. And I used to be a junkie at those tennis teachers' conferences, just there all the time. And with everybody is pretentious. I shouldn't say everybody. Almost everybody's pretentious that we know strokes. But Holt Vaughn, for our listeners, great guy. He's going to quit Apple and come and work for GreatBase. He's going to be our #1 fundraiser. But no, seriously, a guy like that, our listeners, I mean, he's just upbeat. He's just pumped. He's like the Bryan brothers. He's excited about breakfast. You need to have people like that. But I just wonder if you could have him be around crummy strokes for a while if he'd smile a little bit less. But no, I think
Yeah.
that.
No, he's a world class parent. He was actually out there this morning, playing Kayla, who has come down and spent time with you. He was out there battling. They were at 5-4, and then I broke it up so I could jump in and play him in doubles. I should have let him finish it out, but I had time constraints and needed to get a little ego boost.
For the listeners, Holt played tennis at Davidson, became a good tennis player, but then he found out years later that there was a few kids from East Texas, and he found out what the secret was, is they were taught technique. So he has that experience. And again, for our listeners, if you're a tennis parent going down the road for the first time, you're going down the road for the first time. I know that all experiences add up. For myself, I was, tell people I feel like I was born in jackocracy. My father was a volunteer coach. He was a civil engineer, but brothers that did this and that, and it's really interesting with like say Djokovic. He's a first-time tennis player from his family. But they lived at the bottom of a ski mountain. The parents made pancakes in the morning and pizza at night, and with the sacrifices they've made, and then the history of what he endured personally, his family, the country is just amazing.
Yeah.
Let me read this off. Systems.
Yep.
One system that we use, and I do think that Uncle Vic would understand this, the late Vic Braden. Some people think, oh, we're one-dimensional. It's just Vic Braden. But we say, okay, Vic's the Christmas tree and here are all the ornaments. But Don Leary was through a teaching pro by the name of Mike Duncan that I was fortunate enough to spend time with years ago. So he worked for Don Leary. So I said, okay, I'm showing up. It was in Sarasota, and I went through a Don Leary camp. So his book is called Teaching Pro. You can get a copy of it. These images I'm going to give you. Now, people have asked me to do this, and we can type this up and put it on our GreatBase Tennis Facebook. But here are some images for the serve. The hammer is the grip. We do a hammer grip. I was telling a kid today, you got a hammer grip on the backhand. All 4 fingers are together. Pancho Gonzalez had a hammer grip, great player, and a player with finesse after that powerful serve of his. But it's just tap your hand like a hammer. Your stance is like a skateboard. Vandermeer used to have bathroom scale 1, bathroom scale 2 on the tennis court. You can start with your weight forward, you shift your weight back. Mashed potato. Now you can go back and rock on your back foot like Pete Sampras. Harold Solomon, great player. He's a Rudy, 5'0", 100 was 5 in the world. I made a video for his grandson, and the mashed potato, you come up in the ball of the foot. He said, no one does that. And I said, well, I wouldn't say no one. But when Sampras went back on his heel, he eventually came on that front foot. You can't turn your body in if you don't eventually come on that front foot. Cup the racket. We later emphasize, the football throwing position, where your arms at a 90-degree angle and your hands in a supinated position. But if you look at players, Raonic is someone really exaggerated that. With his coach, childhood coach, Casey Curtis, was a guest on our podcast. Elvis Presley, we do a drill. It's a Braden drill, but we gave it the name, the Elvis, like you have the guitar, and it's the Elvis pelvis. You're facing forward and you're turning. But these are all images. And at one time, I get through the list, and I had a woman say to me, how do kids remember that? And this was in the States, and I said to the woman, well, the young boy just went through that with your child. He's German. He's doing it in another language. Turn like a baseball pitcher, have alligator arms, T-Rex, the dinosaur, hang on to the ball like a glass of water, and then you make the letter J. Now, sometimes with these images, we throw the letter J right out the window because people are a little too fancy when they think cursive. Gary Alpert, longtime associate, I know he's starting to work with you soon. This comes from his son. His son was visiting, 20 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And he said the toss is like being at the zoo and feeding a giraffe a piece of bread. Virginia Wade, don't let go of the ball until you get past shoulder level. Tennis is a science, but it's an art. And that's where, to be a lifelong learner, you hang in there for all the buzzwords, all the phrases. And then if you like it, you got to repeat it and make it a story so that it becomes part of your treasure chest. The Cobra, Vic Braden, the wrinkle on your wrist. It's on the inside when you're hitting forehands and backhands, but it's on the outside when you're hitting serves. We stopped doing this because Jeff Lewis said to, and I said, okay, Jeff, I agree. You make a good point. Dennis Vandermeer used to say, pretend you're stirring a paint. When people buy paint and you have that paint bucket and it comes with a stick and you slowly stir the paint. I mean, that was a great image and a great tip for the serve, but Jeff said, well, the problem is they don't know where the bucket is. They don't know where they don't know where the bucket of paint is. They do it all over the place. We don't say third base anymore. We do say Cobra position because people in the States here, kids, they don't play baseball. I mean, and it's really sad. Again, I hate to sound doom and gloom, but most kids, when they ask them to throw a ball, it's like they're hanging on to a shot put. And tennis kids have played quite a while. I mean, we just recently had a kid here who was 11 and can't throw a ball. He's got a 11 on the UTR. He's got a palm up and hangs onto the ball again like it's a shot put. Comb a friend's hair. We tell kids that really are great listers that they start to comb their own hair, and that's a problem. And then, the listers want to, keep us going over stroke production. That's where that horizontal plane that's about 5 feet behind you, we call that clear the shelf. But when people comb the hair, that distance is going to be shorter. When they comb the hair, the elbow is going to be higher. And if the elbow's higher, you're tight. But again, to write these down, we'll type these out. the I know you would remember going through this 25 ideas on how to change someone from palm up to palm down. I mean, that's how
Hmm.
years ago you guys were tested. Um, the mirror, Vic Braden, the salute position, that's another one. So we're up to 28 of these. The salute position that it's not where the salute position is right on your head; it's above your head, and Vic used to say, okay, you could look right up through your racket face. Um, Dunlop years ago with McEnroe had it be the halo. The halo wasn't directly over his head, but they took a position of him holding the serve in the salute position, and it was him being the angel with the halo. Out with really beginning players, the talk on the telephone or listen to the seashell, that doesn't keep the arm at a 90-degree angle, but that's a good way to help people with that the last 180 degrees on the serve where your palm goes in to out. Going strong here. Finish with a high five. High five the giant. Right arm goes over the left arm, the power X. Check out the wristwatch. And then when you're done, the racket goes to the pocket. If you have a continental grip, the racket goes over the pocket, the racket's on edge. If you have palm up, racket goes over the pocket, and the racket faces parallel to the ground. What do you have to say about that's very fast? I'll type that up. Images for the serve. What do you have to say about that? Don't you think it's difficult today, or do you find yourself doing less of this? Ask the question differently. You find yourself doing less of this where, I think you tell someone in the States now, turn like a baseball pitcher, they don't really know what you're talking about. You think that's true?
Yeah, I think multi-sporting has definitely gone down. It's funny, I'm sitting here in my kind of weight room office, and I'm looking, as you were saying, baseball. I glanced over on my wall. It's a big picture of Jeter and A-Rod, and it's the one scene where Derek Jeter at shortstop basically went into the stands horizontally to catch a ball, and A-Rod standing there watching him with his arms up in the air like he couldn't even believe he went up there. And yeah, those guys could they do everything that you just described. And when I take a kid through, I have a big bag that I keep a lot of different things in, everything from softball, baseball to baseball glove. And when I try to get them to throw and teach them how a pitcher uses their glove hand as a reactive break. So, like Nolan Ryan was unbelievable at it when you look at his footage, which is why he was throwing so hard and so long in his life without injury. And, but I mean, all of the versions of it, I mean, we're still throwing that stuff at them, trying to make them better athletes, trying to, I think even if they can't throw, I've had many kids though that I think serve way better than they throw.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean they one that used to practice with Connor, Alexei, remember, who went on and played very high up at Harvard.
Yeah.
He got to the point where he was dropping bombs as a server, but you asked him to throw a ball, he still showed the signs of a youth where he didn't have any involvement in any other sport. But yeah, it's tough to get that out. I think we got to do a better job. I mean, I'm just speaking on my half of it now, where I mean, I've really been thinking about it. I mean, I got to find a way to get kids playing more basketball, inside of our little basketball gym there, getting them out doing some other things, because the athletic benefits. And, when I went out on the road there last summer and bumped into Goff's dad and just started talking sports with him, really, it wasn't really like, what are you doing with your daughter? It was just sports. And his daughter and Ashlyn were the same age, and he asked a question about it, and he said, yeah, he goes, to be honest, I don't care about her tennis. He said, I just tell her every day she's got to get better athletically. And he said, because most of these girls aren't athletes. And, and it was, I think at that particular tournament, 25 of the top 30 women were there. And he's basically saying he thought he was in a world of non-athletes. So, yeah, I think athletic development, it didn't used to be that difficult to to breed. But I think it might have to become a standard part of our curriculum, so to speak.
Well, Jim Courier, number one in the world. I know a lot about the Jim Courier story. I met his sister, and remember even having his mom through a friend of mine, Linda, to read the segment on Niednagel's book on what his brain typing was, and with Courier, that work ethic, so many things. He stayed in the Olympic Village and said, "I used to think I was an athlete." Get the stopwatch out. I mean, we did commentate on the U.S. Open singles, women's, U.S. Open singles, men's, and Coco Gauff has said, "Mom and Dad, take your kid to the track." My brother, who studied Soviet sports, he became an expert on Soviet hockey. Got his PhD in Russian studies. Be a master of two sports. I mean, I tell a lot of kids, basketball, because you can play that inexpensively. You can do solo drills, and you don't even need a hoop. Go to YouTube, start dribbling left-handed, right-handed, forwards, backwards. With Brad Gilbert, love Brad Gilbert, but at one point he was telling Hingis, Martina Hingis, actually, you remember working with John Loftiaga. He was with us in Texas for a short stint. He played doubles with her for 3 years, mixed at Wimbledon. And I said, Diaga, you got to teach her how to serve. And he wasn't going to say boo. I mean, he was the unknown playing with the marquee player. But love Brad Gilbert, but I don't think he's going to be talking to anybody about how Braden would tell you this is how the swing is formulated. How the shoulder goes forward and action reaction, and how what makes it the first 90-degree turn or the 450 degrees. And it's not that complicated, but you have to be exposed to it. Get a little kid football. Have it in your bag. What should be in your bag is also the little book of talent from Daniel Coyle. This is for the parents. We're upstairs. Downstairs, we got some baseball gloves. I'll end with one story. A PE teacher comes to me and he goes, "I hear you train tennis teachers." I go, "Yeah, I've trained tennis teachers for a little bit." He goes, "Well, I'd like to meet with you. Can I come and see you?" I said, Yeah, come and see me. So, he flies in. This was in Tampa years ago. Flies in. It's over the holidays. The guy's 37. He wasn't 37 years old. He taught PE for 37 years. He's about to retire. He's going to teach one more spring. I go, "Really? You're going to teach one more spring semester?" And I go, "You want to learn how to teach tennis?" He goes, "Yeah, I feel like I was pretty competent with all the sports I taught, but I could never get people to hit a tennis ball." I said, "Well, I tell you what, no charge." I was just so impressed with this guy. But what he told me about kids, and this is for the parents, I know this with my own sons. I mean, one year I feel like I bought him a football for Christmas, and the next Christmas I could have given him the same football. That wouldn't have happened years ago, because what he said is electronic toys. Tennis players, the parents, I tell parents all the time to do this, but the parents, don't be your kid's friend until they're an adult. Don't worry if they don't like you. Parents, when your kid comes in the house, they put their cell phone right on the kitchen counter, and that's where it stays. Because, when I was a kid, my father, like all fathers, would call the TV an idiot box. You spend too much time with the idiot box. Get away from the idiot box. And, but I think anyway, that's one thing with that old man. And that was a story for many years ago. My kids were, little kids at the time. But why don't you end this? I know I'm supposed to say this, you can end it, but I'll say this, is that we're trying to create a roster. We want people to be part of a roster. We're not going to start charging fees. We're going to keep doing this for free, but we're asking people we'd like to have people donate $10 a month. We want to do a better job. So I've got that in on the fundraising. So now let's have David Anderson, Minot, North Dakota. There's a long podcast. Maybe we're close to Andy Fitzell's crazy podcast and have to buy people more lottery tickets. But how do you want to end this podcast? Davey Anderson.
Well, yeah, I mean,
well, I was thinking what we could do. I don't want to interrupt you, but
yeah, go ahead.
And I tell you all the time that your wife married bad. Should we end on that one, or you want to go in a different direction?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on who you ask. I think she hit the lottery. But no,
I love that answer. She hit the lottery. All right, what do you got?
No, I mean I'm going down to help out Carter, at the Texas Tennis Summit, he asked me to come and say a few words. So the beauty, I mean, everything that I'm going to be saying down there is stuff I pretty much have acquired from you over the years. And
tell everybody who's Mike Carter. He was a guest one time. Tell us about Mike Carter.
Yeah, Mike Carter is he's a handsome devil. He looked a lot like Michael Landon.
Yeah,
a young Michael Landon back in the day. Bonanza. He had good hair, and but he's involved with USTA Texas and really nationally for recreational tennis. And but he's a great tennis teacher. The guy has more energy than you could ever imagine. And
it's all those personality lessons I gave him.
Yeah, I'm excited to go down there. But the topic that I chose was, blending the art and science of tennis teaching. And you hit on many of those things tonight. And I think that, I would say this to anybody that has hung around and listened this long already. If you're a parent, put hurdles in the way of your kids, prepare them rather than protect them. And, it doesn't mean it's not abuse. It's just, the tougher, every sport is showing that the more adversity that an athlete goes through, that the better chance they have for success. I would say that if you're a coach or a teacher of tennis, that the only joy of it really comes when you start seeking answers, and that you have to go out on a mission, really on a personal mission first, to just continue to gain as much knowledge, and then, like you said, come up with ways to utilize that knowledge. And then if you're a player of any age really listening, I would say that there's just the beauty is really what Jimmy Connor said. I mean, today I went out at 7:30 in the morning, club opens, and I played horribly, but I really do believe what Jimmy Connor said is true. And the best thing in life is playing tennis and winning, and the second best thing is playing tennis and losing. And if you go into it with that attitude, and the scoreboard doesn't regulate it, then it's much easier for you to make adjustments and be on that personal quest to kind of just be the best you can be. So what I would close with.
No, thanks. Say hello to Mike Carter for us. I love Carter.
I will.
Spent 5 years with that young boy. I think he remembers those years well. I used to just love to yell his last name, Carter. But here's
make
one.
Sure he remembers.
Here's one. I don't know if this is how it goes, but the question: for parents, should you prepare the kid for the road or prepare the road for the kid? And I do think sometimes people have that backwards. You got to prepare the kid for the road. I mean, and I do think we've touched upon that. Is that, and again, I'm all for the parents, and I think the parents that sacrifice so much for their tennis, but it is a long road for everyone. And I think it takes 10 years to be a player. It takes 10 years to be a tennis teacher, and it takes 10 years to really understand the ins and outs of tennis. But no, this has been great. So I think we're under the 4-hour mark.
Good.
But your wife did hit the lottery.
She did. I'm glad we agree on that topic.
Yeah,
Ivan, thank you behind the scenes, Ivan.
Yeah, Yvonne.
Yvonne.
He's the number one, Yvonne. Lendl only got to US Open finals 8 times. But anyway, I hope these crazy podcasts, I'm told by people that they like them. Listen 10 minutes at a time, and you get through one a week. But David, thanks for your time.
Yeah, appreciate it. You guys have a good night.
You too.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. I need to shut up. This is a long podcast. I think we're going to limit these to 40 minutes starting next week. Actually, I know people like the length of these. There are some crazy people out there. Anyway, adios, amigos. Thanks for listening. For the betterment of tennis, Steve Smith, GreatBase Tennis. Adios.